For my granddaughter Zoe's 9th birthday, my son's wealthy in-laws sent her a massive teddy bear as a gift. At first, she hugged it tight and her face lit up with joy, but then she suddenly froze. "Grandpa?" she whispered to me, her voice trembling. "Why does the bear have a hard lump in its tummy?" I took the toy from her hands, feigning a smile, but the moment I felt the weight of it, my blood ran cold. It wasn't just stuffing inside. I took a closer look and felt my face go pale. It was a trap. I started digging immediately. 3 days later, the police showed up at my door, but they weren't there to arrest me. They were there for the people who thought they could destroy my family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth. I parked my rusted 2004 Chevy Silverado a block away from my son Tyrell's house. I didn't want to ruin the aesthetic. That is what my son's father-in-law Richard Stanford had told me the last time I visited. He said my truck looked like a scrap heap that had rolled out of a landfill and onto his pristine manicured street. I didn't mind the walk. It gave me time to adjust my mask. To the world, and even to my own son, I was Jeremiah Jem Cross, a retired postal worker who lived on a fixed income in a drafty wooden house on the edge of town. I wore flannel shirts with frayed collars and work boots that had seen better days. I drove a truck that rattled when it went over 40 miles per hour. It was a good disguise. It was a comfortable disguise. No one looks twice at an old, broke black man in America. They don't see the man who spent 40 years as a forensic accountant for shadow corporations analyzing financial risks for people who did not exist on paper. They don't see the angel investor who quietly holds the debt bonds of half the commercial real estate in downtown Manhattan. They just see Jem the old mailman. And that is exactly how I liked it. I walked up the driveway of Tyrell's house. It was a beautiful modern home, too big for 3 people and definitely too expensive for an architect whose firm had been struggling for the last 2 years. I knew my son was drowning in debt trying to keep up with the lifestyle his wife Kimberly's parents demanded. I could see it in the dark circles under his eyes and the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was looking. But today was Zoe's birthday, and Tyrell was putting on a brave face. The backyard was transformed into a fairy tale. There were pink balloons everywhere, a catering team serving hors d'oeuvres I couldn't pronounce, and a string quartet playing soft music near the pool. It was elegant. It was expensive. And it felt completely suffocating. I had just greeted Tyrell and Kimberly when I heard the roar of an engine. A sleek silver Porsche pulled into the driveway, aggressively blocking the path for anyone else. Richard and Pamela Stanford had arrived. They stepped out of the car like royalty visiting their subjects. Richard was a tall man with silver hair and a perpetual sneer, wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. Pamela was draped in silk and diamonds, her face pulled tight by one too many surgeries. They didn't walk, they glided. Richard tossed his keys to my son without even looking at him, as if Tyrell were the valet. "Park this somewhere safe, Tyrell," he said, his voice loud enough for the guests to hear. "And be careful with the clutch. It is sensitive, unlike you." Tyrell caught the keys, his face flushing with humiliation, but he said nothing. He just nodded and went to move the car. I felt a flash of anger, but I pushed it down. Not yet, I told myself. Patience. Richard turned and saw me standing by the buffet table holding a plate of appetizers. His eyes scanned my faded flannel shirt and my worn-out jeans with a look of pure disgust. Well, if it isn't Jem," Richard said, walking over with a glass of champagne in his hand. "I am surprised that truck of yours made it all the way here. I hope you parked it in the next county. We don't want the property values to drop while we are cutting the cake, do we?" Pamela laughed, a sharp tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Richard, be nice," she said, though her eyes were cold. "Jem probably had to save up gas money for a week just to get here. Did you bring a gift, Jem, or are you just here for the free food?" I smiled, the slow, simple smile of the man they thought I was. "I brought Zoe a card and a savings bond," I said softly. "It isn't much, but it is for her college fund." Richard snorted. "A savings bond? How quaint. That might pay for her textbooks for 1 semester if she goes to a state school." "Don't worry, Jem. We will take care of Zoe's real future. We have plans for her, big plans." He turned his back on me, dismissing me as if I were a piece of furniture, and walked toward the center of the yard. "Everyone gather round," he shouted, clapping his hands. "It is time for the main event. Pamela and I have a special gift for our darling granddaughter." The guests gathered, creating a semicircle around Zoe, who was sitting on a throne-like chair, looking overwhelmed. She was a sweet girl 9 years old with my eyes and her mother's smile. She loved reading and drawing and spending quiet afternoons on my porch listening to the birds. She hated crowds and loud noises, but Richard and Pamela never cared about what Zoe liked. They only cared about how Zoe made them look. 2 catering staff members brought out a box. It was enormous, wrapped in gold paper with a silk ribbon. Zoe stood up, her eyes wide. "Open it, sweetheart," Pamela urged, holding up her phone to record the moment. "This is from Grandma and Grandpa Stanford. Something special just for you." Zoe tore the paper. Inside was a teddy bear. But it wasn't just a teddy bear. It was a life-sized monstrosity, easily 5 feet tall, with golden fur and glassy eyes that seemed to follow you. It looked expensive. It looked impressive. The guests oohed and ahed, clapping politely. Zoe forced a smile and hugged the bear. It was almost bigger than she was. "Thank you, Grandma." "Thank you, Grandpa," she said, her voice small. "Go on, give it a big squeeze," Richard commanded, taking a sip of his drink. "Show us how much you love it." Zoe squeezed the bear, and that was when it happened. Her smile faltered. She pulled back slightly, her eyebrows knitting together in confusion. She looked at her other grandfather, Richard, and then she looked at me. I was standing at the edge of the crowd watching her closely. I saw the panic in her eyes. She leaned in toward the bear again, pressing her ear against its chest. Then she looked at me again and mouthed the word Grandpa. I moved. I didn't walk fast. I didn't run. I just shuffled through the crowd, playing the part of the doting grandfather wanting to see the gift. "Excuse me, pardon me," I muttered, stepping past women in designer dresses. I reached Zoe just as she was backing away from the bear. "What is wrong, baby girl?" I whispered, crouching down to her level. "Grandpa," she whispered back so low only I could hear. "It is hard. The tummy is really hard, and it is making a noise, like a buzzing." My instincts, honed by decades of hunting down fraud and deception, flared up instantly. A teddy bear shouldn't be hard. A teddy bear shouldn't buzz. I looked at Richard. He was watching us. His eyes narrowed, his smile tight and predatory. He wasn't looking at Zoe with love. He was looking at her with expectation. He was waiting for something. I stood up and put my hand on the bear's shoulder. "Well, look at this giant fellow," I said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear my voice taking on a goofy, exaggerated tone. "He is so big he might eat all the cake. All. Come on, Zoe, let's take him over to the gift table so he doesn't knock anyone over. I am a clumsy old man, and I don't want to trip over his big feet." I grabbed the bear. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been. The weight distribution was off. It was bottom heavy, as if something dense was packed into the lower torso. I hoisted it up, pretending to struggle more than I actually was, and carried it toward the garage, away from the prying eyes of the guests and away from Richard's calculating gaze. "Hey, put that down!" Richard barked, stepping forward. "Zoe wants to play with it here. She will play with it in a minute," I called back, not stopping. "I just need to fix a loose thread I saw on the back. We don't want it unraveling on her big day, do we? Just giving it a quick grandpa fix." I didn't wait for his permission. I ducked into the open garage and hit the button to lower the door just enough to block the view from the yard, but not enough to look suspicious. I dragged the bear behind Tyrell's tool bench into the shadows. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. The trembling old man act vanished. I pulled a small, razor-sharp pocket knife from my jeans. I always carried it. Old habits die hard. I turned the bear over. There was a seam running down the back, meticulously stitched, but the thread was slightly different in shade from the rest. Someone had opened this bear and closed it up again recently. I inserted the tip of the blade and sliced the thread, 1 inch, 2 inches. I reached my hand inside the stuffing. My fingers brushed against polyester fiber fill, soft and yielding. I dug deeper. Then I felt it, a hard plastic box. I pulled it out carefully. It was a black, rectangular device about the size of a deck of cards with a small red light blinking rhythmically, a GPS tracker with a listening device, a high-end model, the kind private investigators use. Why would Richard bug a toy given to his own granddaughter? But that wasn't all. My hand went back inside. There was something else, something heavy and wrapped in plastic. I pulled it out and felt the air leave my lungs. It was a clear Ziploc bag taped into a tight brick. Inside was a dense white powder. I froze. I knew what this was. I had seen it enough times in evidence lockers and on the desks of corrupt CEOs I had taken down. Cocaine. A lot of it. Maybe 0.5 kilogram. enough to send someone to prison for 20 years, enough to ensure that a father lost custody of his child forever. The puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind with terrifying clarity. This wasn't a gift. This was a Trojan horse. Richard and Pamela weren't just trying to buy Zoe's affection. They were planting evidence. They were going to call the police. They were going to have the house raided. If this bear was found in Tyrell's house, Tyrell would be arrested for trafficking. He would lose his license. He would go to prison. And Richard and Pamela, the concerned, wealthy grandparents, would step in to take emergency custody of Zoe. They would take her away to their mansion and erase us from her life. I looked at the bag of white powder in my hand. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through me. They were willing to destroy their own son-in-law. They were willing to traumatize their 9-year-old granddaughter by having her father dragged away in handcuffs at her birthday party just to get what they wanted. I looked up through the small window in the garage door. A police cruiser was driving slowly past the house. It didn't stop, but it slowed down. Richard had already made the call. The clock was ticking. I looked at my reflection in the dusty mirror hanging over the tool bench. The tired eyes of the postal worker were gone. In their place were the cold, hard eyes of the man who used to make billionaires weep in courtrooms. "You want to play games?" Richard, I whispered to the empty garage, my voice low and dangerous. "You want to frame us. You want to destroy my family. You think I am just a poor old man driving a scrap truck. You have no idea who I am. But you are about to find out." I put the knife away. I had work to do. And I had about 5 minutes to do it before the police knocked on the door. The old gem cross was gone. The ghost auditor was back. And I was about to teach the Stanford family a lesson in liquidity that they would never forget. I stood in the dim light of the garage with the bag of narcotics in my hand and a police cruiser idling just down the street. Panic is for amateurs. Panic makes your hands shake and your mind clouded. I did not panic. I went into work mode. I had 5 minutes tops before Richard grew impatient and escalated the situation, or before an officer decided to knock on the front door for a routine noise complaint that would turn into a raid. I needed a switch. I slipped the brick of powder into the deep cargo pocket of my work pants and moved silently toward the door connecting the garage to the kitchen. The party was in full swing in the backyard. I could hear the string quartet playing a waltz and the clinking of champagne glasses. The kitchen was empty. The catering staff was outside serving the guests. I scanned the pantry shelves. My eyes landed on exactly what I needed: a 5-pound bag of premium organic all-purpose flour. Kimberly liked to bake when her anxiety wasn't paralyzing her. I grabbed the bag and a roll of heavy-duty duct tape from the utility drawer. I was back in the garage in 20 seconds. I laid the flour on the workbench next to the drugs. The weight was similar but not exact. The density was different. To an untrained hand, it might feel the same, but if the police weighed it, the discrepancy would be obvious. But I wasn't trying to fool a lab. I was trying to fool a field test. I poured the flour into a heavy-duty freezer bag I found in a box of recycling. I taped it tight, shaping it into a brick that matched the dimensions of the cocaine. My hands moved with a speed and precision that defied my 69 years. This was muscle memory. Back in the 80s, when I was auditing shell companies in Panama, I had to swap out incriminating hard drives from server rooms while security guards were changing shifts. This was child's play compared to that. I slid the flour brick back into the teddy bear's hollow stomach. I nestled it right next to the GPS tracker. Then came the stitching. I didn't have a needle, but I had a small staple gun and a tube of super glue in my truck's toolbox. I retrieved them quickly. I pulled the golden fur together, overlapping the seams so the cut wouldn't be visible. I applied a thin line of glue and pressed the fabric down. It held. I ruffled the fur to hide the seam. It wasn't perfect, but in the dim light of a bedroom or under the quick glance of an officer, it would pass. I checked my watch. 4 minutes had passed. I took the real drugs and wrapped them in an old oily rag I used for the truck's engine. I shoved the bundle deep into the bottom of a bucket filled with used motor oil in the corner of the garage. It was a temporary hiding spot, but it would mask the scent from any K9 unit that wasn't specifically signaling on that exact bucket. I wiped my hands on my jeans, leaving a streak of grease. Good. It added to the character. I was just the dirty old grandpa fixing a toy. I picked up the bear. It looked innocent again, just a giant plush toy with a golden coat. But now, it wasn't a container for my son's destruction. It was a trap for Richard Stanford. I walked back out into the yard, hoisting the bear on my shoulder. Richard was watching me from across the lawn. He frowned when he saw me. He expected sirens by now. He expected chaos. Instead, he saw me smiling, that goofy, toothy smile, walking toward Zoe. "All fixed, baby girl," I said loud enough for Richard to hear. "Just a loose seam. Grandpa patched it up good as new." I handed the bear back to Zoe. She hugged it, but she looked at me with question marks in her eyes. I gave her a wink. "It is okay now," I whispered. "The tummy is just full of extra love." I needed to know exactly what Richard was planning. The GPS tracker inside the bear had a microphone. I knew these devices. They usually had a local storage option in case the signal dropped. I had noticed a micro SD card slot on the side of the black box when I was inside the bear. I had deftly popped the card out with my thumbnail before I sewed it back up. It was a tiny piece of plastic smaller than a fingernail, but it held the power to destroy the Stanford Empire. I slipped away from the party while everyone was singing happy birthday. I told Tyrell I wasn't feeling well and needed to lie down. He looked relieved. He didn't want his rich in-laws making any more comments about my appearance. I walked to my truck, the SD card burning a hole in my pocket. I sat in the cab of my Silverado and locked the doors. I pulled a small card reader from my glove compartment. I always kept one. Information is currency, and you never know when you might need to make a withdrawal. I plugged it into my laptop, which I kept hidden under the seat. I inserted the card. There were 3 audio files. I put in my earbuds and clicked the first one. It was time-stamped 2 days ago. The voice was unmistakable. It was Pamela Stanford. Her tone was sharp and impatient. "Are you sure this is enough, Richard?" she asked. 500 grams seems excessive. It has to be a felony amount." Pamela Richards' voice replied, smooth and arrogant. "We don't just want him arrested, we want him buried. If they find a personal use amount, he might get probation. We need trafficking charges. That is the only way the judge grants us immediate emergency custody of Zoe." I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. They weren't just trying to frame Tyrell. They had calculated the exact legal weight needed to ensure he went to prison for life. They had researched the sentencing guidelines. This was premeditated evil. I clicked the second file, time-stamped yesterday. "What about the old man?" Pamela asked. "Jem, he is always around. What if he takes the fall for his son?" Richard laughed. "That broke old fool. He doesn't have the resources to fight a parking ticket, let alone a federal drug charge. Let him take the fall. It is even better. It proves Zoe is surrounded by a criminal family. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. We will argue that Tyrell knew about his father's activities and endangered his daughter. We win either way. Besides, I have a feeling the police might get an anonymous tip that the drugs originated from Jem's house. I am going to have the tracker pinging from his address tonight." I froze. They weren't just targeting Tyrell, they were targeting me too. They wanted to wipe out the entire cross bloodline from Zoe's life. They wanted to make us look like a syndicate of thugs so they could step in as the white saviors and take my granddaughter away to Switzerland or wherever they planned to hide her. I listened to the third file. It was recorded just hours ago. "Once we have Zoe, we can access the trust fund," Richard said, his voice low and greedy. "The company needs that liquidity, Pamela. The hotels are bleeding cash. We need that $2 million by the end of the quarter, or the banks are going to call in the loans. Zoe is our golden ticket." There it was, the motive. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about protecting Zoe from a bad environment. It was about money. They were broke. The great Stanford Empire was a house of cards, and they were willing to send an innocent man to prison and orphan a 9-year-old girl just to pay their debts. I ejected the card and put it in my wallet. My hands were steady, but my heart was beating a war drum. They wanted to paint me as a criminal. They wanted to make me the villain. Fine, I would play the villain. But I would be the kind of villain they saw in their nightmares. I started the truck. I didn't go back to the party. I drove straight to my house. It was a small wooden structure on a quiet street with peeling paint and a porch that leaned to the left. To the neighbors, I was just the quiet old man who waved and kept to himself. Tonight, I was a fortress. I walked inside and placed the bear on the kitchen table. I had taken the bear back from Zoe when no one was looking, telling her I wanted to take it home to clean a spot of dirt I had gotten on it. She trusted me. She let me take it. Now the bear sat there, staring at me with its glassy eyes. Inside it was a brick of flour and a disabled tracker. I knew Richard was watching the GPS signal on his phone. He would see the dot moving from Tyrell's house to mine. He would think his plan was working perfectly. He would think I had stolen the drugs, or that Tyrell had given them to me to hide. He would call the police and give them my address. I sat in my armchair in the dark and waited. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat there watching the street through the slats of the blinds. I had a pot of coffee brewing in the kitchen. I wasn't going to sleep. Sleep was for people who had nothing to lose. I had everything to lose. I reviewed my assets in my head. $50 million in diversified holdings, a network of contacts that reached into the DOJ and the IRS, a lawyer who was more shark than human. And now I had a recording of Richard Stanford admitting to planting evidence and conspiring to commit kidnapping and fraud. I looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. Richard wouldn't wait until morning. He wanted the drama. He wanted the raid to happen in the dead of night to maximize the terror and confusion. He wanted to see me dragged out in my pajamas. I saw the headlights cut through the darkness first. No sirens. They were coming in quiet, tactical. 3 cruisers pulled up to the curb. I saw the silhouettes of officers exiting the vehicles, hands on their holsters. They moved toward my front door. I took a sip of my coffee. It was black and bitter, just how I liked it. I stood up and smoothed my flannel shirt. I unlocked the front door and opened it before they could knock. I wanted them to see me standing there, calm and composed. I wanted Richard, who I knew was watching from his car down the street, to see that I wasn't afraid. "Officer," I said, my voice gravelly and confused, playing the part perfectly. "Is there a problem? I was just about to bake a cake for my granddaughter." The lead officer stepped forward, his hand on his weapon. "Jeremiah Cross, we have a warrant to search these premises. Step aside." I stepped aside. Let the show begin. It was exactly 2:14 in the morning when the peace of my neighborhood was shattered. I had been sitting in the dark, nursing a cup of cold coffee, just watching the street through the slats of my blinds. I knew they were coming. I had seen the GPS dot on my cloned tracker app blink violently as Richard updated the location for the authorities. But knowing an avalanche is coming does not stop the ground from shaking when it hits. The first sign was not a siren. They came in silent mode to catch the dangerous criminal unawares. It was the synchronized slamming of car doors. 4 cruisers blocked my driveway and the street in front of my house. Then came the heavy boots thudding across my porch stairs. The wood groaned under the weight of armed men. "Police, open up, we have a warrant." The shout was accompanied by a fist pounding on my door so hard I thought the hinges would snap. I did not hurry. I stood up slowly, groaning audibly as if my joints were stiff from sleep. I shuffled to the door and unlocked the deadbolt. Before I could even turn the knob, the door was shoved open, pushing me back. Flashlights blinded me. I held up my hands, trembling just enough to sell the performance. "Please," I said, my voice cracking. "What is happening? I am just an old man." "Secure the perimeter, check the back rooms," a voice barked. A German shepherd strained against a leash, barking ferociously, its claws scrabbling on my hardwood floors. Officers in tactical gear swarmed past me, overturning cushions and sweeping things off shelves. It was unnecessary theater. They knew exactly where the target was. They were just making a mess to humiliate me. I looked out the open front door. The entire street had woken up. Porch lights flickered on like accusing eyes. Mrs. Gable from across the street was standing in her driveway in her bathrobe, clutching her chest. She had always looked at me with suspicion ever since I moved in 5 years ago. She watched me mow my lawn with a frown, as if my very presence lowered her property value. Now she finally had proof. I saw her shaking her head, talking to Mr. Henderson next door. I could almost hear her thoughts. I knew it. I knew he was trouble. These people always bring trouble. The shame was a physical weight. Not for me, but for what they were trying to project onto me. They wanted to strip me of my dignity. They wanted to parade me in front of my white neighbors as a criminal. "Officer, please tell me what you are looking for," I pleaded, leaning against the wall for support. "We received a credible tip regarding narcotics distribution at this address," the lead officer said, "sir." He was a young man with a buzz cut and eyes that held no sympathy. "Jeremiah Cross, you are detained pending a search of the premises." Just then another car pulled up. It wasn't a police cruiser, it was a silver Porsche. Richard and Pamela Stanford stepped out. They were dressed immaculately even at this ungodly hour. Richard wore a cashmere coat over his suit and Pamela had a silk scarf wrapped around her neck. They didn't look sleepy. They looked energized. They walked up to the police line but stayed back just enough to look like concerned citizens. I saw Richard catch the eye of the lead officer. A subtle nod passed between them. The tip hadn't been anonymous. Or if it was, the police knew exactly who the concerned grandfather was. I sat on a kitchen chair where an officer had directed me. My heart was beating slow and steady, a rhythm of cold fury. They were destroying my home. They were pulling books off shelves and dumping drawers onto the floor. It was a violation. "Got it!" someone shouted from the living room. The officer emerged holding the golden teddy bear. It looked ridiculous in his grip, a giant plush toy held like a piece of evidence. The lead officer took the bear. He placed it on the kitchen table in front of me. "Is this yours, Mr. Cross?" "It is my granddaughter's," I said, my eyes wide with feigned confusion. "I brought it home to fix a tear." The officer pulled a knife from his belt. He didn't bother with the seam I had carefully stitched. He slashed the bear's stomach open in one violent motion. Stuffing exploded onto the table. He reached in. His hand groped around inside the golden fluff. "Got the package," he announced. He pulled out the brick. It was wrapped in the heavy freezer bag and duct tape just as I had prepared it. It looked ominous. It looked illegal. It looked like 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Richard Stanford stepped onto the porch. He couldn't help himself. He needed to see the moment of my destruction up close. He stood in the doorway, his face a mask of false sorrow, but his eyes dancing with victory. "Oh, Jim," he said, shaking his head. "I never thought you would stoop this low. Storing drugs in a child's toy. In Zoe's toy. You are a monster." Pamela stood behind him, covering her mouth with her hand, gasping theatrically. Before I could respond, tires screeched outside. Tyrell burst through the police line. He must have seen the lights, or maybe Kimberly had called him. He was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, his face pale with terror. "Dad," he screamed, running toward the porch. An officer grabbed him, holding him back. "Let me go." "That is my father." Tyrell looked at the table. He saw the bear. He saw the brick of white powder. He looked at Richard standing there with his judgment, and then he looked at me sitting in the chair looking frail and defeated. My son didn't hesitate. He didn't ask questions. He didn't doubt. He just saw his father in a trap and threw himself in front of the bullet. "It is mine," Tyrell shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "It isn't his. He didn't know. I put it there. Arrest me, not him." My heart broke and swelled at the same time. My foolish, brave son. He was willing to go to prison to confess to a crime he didn't commit just to save me. He thought I had turned to crime to help him pay his debts. He thought this was his fault. Richard turned to Tyrell, his expression shifting to one of mock pity. "Tyrell, don't try to cover for him. We know the truth. We know where this came from. You are just as bad as he is, exposing Zoe to this filth." "Officer, arrest him too," Richard commanded, pointing a manicured finger at Tyrell. "He is an accomplice. He just confessed." The lead officer looked from me to Tyrell. He seemed unsure for the first time. The narrative was getting messy. "Wait," I said. My voice wasn't trembling anymore. It was firm enough to cut through the noise. "Tyrell, stop talking. You don't know what that is." "Of course he knows what it is," Richard sneered. "It is cocaine gem, enough to put you away until you die." The officer picked up the brick. He took a small field test kit from his pocket. He pulled out a vial of clear liquid. He used his knife to puncture the tape and the plastic bag. A small puff of white dust escaped. "Let's verify the substance," the officer said. He scooped a small amount of the white powder onto the tip of his knife and dropped it into the vial. He shook it. The room went silent. Richard leaned forward, his breath held. Tyrell was sobbing quietly, his head in his hands. Pamela was already typing something on her phone, probably a press release about the tragedy of her son-in-law's criminal family. We all watched the vial. If it was cocaine, the liquid would turn a bright, vivid blue. The liquid swirled. It turned a cloudy, milky white. It stayed white. The officer frowned. He shook it again. Nothing. He held it up to the light. "Negative," he muttered. "What?" Richard snapped, his voice losing its smooth polish. "That is impossible. Test it again. Your kit is defective." The officer looked at Richard, annoyed. He opened a second vial. He repeated the process. He scooped more powder. He shook it. Cloudy white. No blue. "It is not cocaine," the officer said. He dipped a finger into the tear in the bag and touched the powder to his tongue. He spat it out on the floor. "It is flour," he said. "It is baking flour." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. It pressed against the walls of the kitchen. Tyrell lifted his head, his eyes red and confused. Pamela stopped typing. Richard looked like he had been slapped in the face with a wet towel. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I stood up slowly. I adjusted my flannel shirt. I looked at the officer, and then I looked at Richard. I let my face relax into an expression of senile innocence. "Oh dear," I said, scratching my head. "Is that where I put it? I was going to bake cookies for Zoe. You know how much she loves my sugar cookies. I must have gotten confused. I thought the bear was the pantry. My memory, you know. It isn't what it used to be. I do strange things sometimes. Last week I put the milk in the oven." I looked at Richard with wide, watery eyes. "I am so sorry, Richard. Did you think it was drugs?" "Oh my heavens. Why would I have drugs? I am just a mailman." The lead officer looked at the bag of flour and then at the destroyed teddy bear. He looked at the mess his men had made of my house. He looked at Richard, who was turning a shade of purple I had never seen before. "You called in a raid for baking flour," the officer asked Richard, his voice dripping with disgust. "You wasted police resources. You woke up the whole neighborhood. For flour." "But it was cocaine," Richard sputtered. "I know it was. I suspected." "You suspected," the officer cut him off. "You said you had concrete evidence. You said he was a trafficker. Someone told me," Richard stammered. "He was losing control." The narrative had collapsed. The officer turned to me. "Mr. Cross, I apologize for the disturbance. We will have someone come out to document the damage for reimbursement." He turned to his men. "Pack it up. Let's go." "Wait!" Richard screamed. "You can't just leave. Search the rest of the house. He hid it. I know he hid it. He switched it. Sir, if you don't step back, I will arrest you for filing a false report and obstruction of justice," the officer warned, his hand resting on his belt. "Go home," Richard glared at me. If looks could kill, I would have been a pile of ash on the kitchen floor. He knew. In that moment he knew. He looked into my eyes and he didn't see the confused old man anymore. He saw the shark. He saw the predator who had just eaten his lunch. I smiled at him. It was a small, cold smile, just for him. "You should go home, Richard," I said softly, "and maybe check your own pantry. You never know what you might find." Richard spun on his heel and marched out, shoving past Tyrell. Pamela scurried after him, looking terrified. They got into their Porsche and sped away, the engine roaring in the quiet night. Tyrell stood in the kitchen looking at me. He looked at the flour. He looked at the bear. "Dad," he whispered, "what just happened?" I walked over to him and put my hand on his shoulder. I squeezed it tight. "Nothing, son," I said. "Just a misunderstanding. Go home to Kimberly. Tell her everything is fine." Tyrell looked at me for a long time. He saw something in my face he hadn't seen before. He nodded slowly. "Okay, Dad. Okay." He left, closing the door softly behind him. I was alone, in the ruin of my house. I picked up the bag of flour, premium organic. I wasn't lying about the cookies. I poured the flour into a glass jar and set it on the counter. I looked out the window. The police were gone. The neighbors had turned off their lights, disappointed that the show was over. Mrs. Gable was probably already on the phone spreading the gossip. Let them talk. I went to the garage and pulled the bucket of motor oil from the corner. I reached in and pulled out the oily rag bundle. The real drugs. I needed to dispose of them properly. I couldn't just flush them. That was amateur hour. I had work to do. Richard Stanford had fired the first shot. He had tried to frame me. He had tried to destroy my son. He had insulted my intelligence. I walked to my bedroom and pulled a burner phone from a hollowed-out book on my nightstand. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. "Alana," I said, when the voice on the other end answered, crisp and alert, even at 3 a.m. Gem Alana Hart replied. "I thought you were retired." "I was," I said, "but I think I just found a new project. I need you to run a full forensic audit on the Stanford Hotel Group. I want to know every debt, every lien, every hidden account. And Alana, yes, boss, find out who their suppliers are. I have a feeling they're about to have some serious supply chain issues." I hung up. The night was quiet again, but it was the quiet before the storm. And this time, I was the one bringing the thunder. The morning sun did not bring relief. It brought my son to my doorstep looking like a man walking to the gallows. Tyrell sat at my kitchen table, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I placed a mug of black coffee in front of him. I did not touch him. I did not offer empty platitudes. I waited. "Dad," he finally whispered, his voice raw. "I owe them. I owe them everything." I sat down opposite him. The adrenaline from the police raid had faded, leaving a cold clarity in its place. "Tell me." It started 6 months ago, Tyrell said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. My firm was doing well, Dad. We had 3 major contracts lined up. The city library renovation, the new medical center annex, and the boutique hotel downtown. It was supposed to be our breakout year. Then one by one they vanished. He looked up at me and the pain in his eyes was devastating. The library board suddenly decided to go with a different firm, citing budget concerns. The medical center pulled the contract due to a scheduling conflict that didn't exist. The hotel developers just stopped answering my calls. In 2 weeks, I went from projected record profits to insolvency. I had payroll to meet Dad, I had a mortgage, I had Kimberly's credit card bills, and Richard offered to help, I said. It wasn't a question. Tyrell nodded. He came to me like a savior. He said he knew business was tough. He said family helps family. He offered me a loan, $200,000. Just to bridge the gap, he said. No interest, just a handshake. I closed my eyes. The oldest trick in the Predator's handbook. Create the crisis, then sell the solution. I took the money, Tyrell continued. I paid my staff. I kept the lights on. But the new contracts didn't come. Every time I bid on a project, I got undercut or disqualified on technicalities. It was like I was cursed. And then yesterday, before the party, Richard called me into his study. He said the loan was due. He called the note. I said, my voice flat. He said he needed the liquidity, Tyrell said. He said if I couldn't pay him back immediately, he would foreclose on the house. He holds the lien, Dad. I didn't know he bought the mortgage from the bank. He owns my house. He owns my firm. He owns me. It was worse than I thought. Richard hadn't just lent him money. He had systematically dismantled my son's livelihood while simultaneously tightening a noose around his neck. It was financial strangulation disguised as charity. But that is not the worst part, Tyrell said, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. He gave me a choice. He said he would forgive the debt. He would let us keep the house. He would even invest in the firm to get us back on track. In exchange for what? Tyrell reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick document. He slid it across the table. It was heavy. Legal heavy. In exchange for Zoe. I picked up the document. My eyes scanned the legalese. It was a voluntary termination of parental rights and a transfer of full legal custody to Richard and Pamela Stanford. It cited financial instability and emotional distress as the reasons. It was a sale contract. They were buying my granddaughter for $200,000. I looked at Tyrell. He was weeping openly now. He said he would send her to the best boarding school in Switzerland, Tyrell choked out. He said she would have a life I could never give her. He said if I didn't sign, he would ruin me. He would take the house, he would sue me for fraud, he would make sure I never worked as an architect again. And Kimberly, where is Kimberly? I asked sharply. She is at home, Tyrell said. She is in bed. She won't get up. She just cries, Dad. She says we have no choice. She says her parents always win. She is terrified of them. She says if we fight, they will destroy us. Kimberly was broken. Years of emotional abuse by Richard and Pamela had conditioned her to be helpless. She saw her parents as God's angry, vengeful gods who could not be defied. She was willing to give up her own child because she truly believed resistance was futile. I stood up. The rage I felt was a cold, hard thing in my chest. It wasn't the hot flash of anger. It was the absolute zero of a man who has decided to go to war. Do not sign that paper, Tyrell, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Dad, I have until 5:00 today, Tyrell said, looking up at me with hopeless eyes. If I don't sign, they are coming for the house tomorrow. We will be on the street. Let them come, I said. Let them try. You go home. You tell Kimberly to pack a bag. If things get bad, you come here. But do not sign that paper. Do you hear me? But the money? I will handle the money. Tyrell looked at me like I was senile. Dad, you are a retired mailman. You live on a pension. How are you going to handle $200,000? I walked over to him and put my hands on his shoulders. I squeezed hard enough to make him flinch. You let me worry about that, I said. You just hold the line. You are a cross. We do not sell our children. Now go. I watched him leave. He walked like an old man, defeated and broken. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner. Then I went to my bedroom closet. I pushed aside the old coats and flannel shirts. I reached into the back and pulled out a loose floorboard. Underneath was a small fireproof safe. I spun the dial. Inside were passports, stacks of cash, and a black leather notebook. I took the notebook and a burner phone. I walked out of the house. I didn't take my truck. I walked 3 miles to the south side of town to a diner called the Rusty Spoon. It was a dive with sticky tables and coffee that tasted like battery acid. It was perfect. No one from Richard Stanford's world would ever set foot in here. I slid into a booth in the back corner. A waitress named Marge poured me coffee without asking. She knew me as the quiet guy who tipped well. 5 minutes later, the door opened. A woman walked in. She was wearing a sharp navy blazer over a silk blouse. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a leather briefcase that cost more than the diner itself. She looked out of place, but she walked with a confidence that made people look away. Alana Hart sat down opposite me. She didn't say hello. She just signaled for coffee. "You look like hell, Jem," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I feel like hell," I replied. "I need you to work your magic, Alana." "I thought you were retired," she said, opening her briefcase. "You told me the quiet life was the only life. You said you were done hunting monsters." I said. But a monster came to my backyard. I slid a piece of paper across the table. It had Richard Stanford's name, the name of his holding company, and the name of Tyrell's architectural firm. "This is the target," I said. "Richard Stanford. He owns the Stanford Hotel Group. I want to know everything, but specifically, I want to know about his relationship with the City Planning Commission and the local construction unions. My son's contracts were canceled, all of them, in a 6-month period. That is not bad luck. That is sabotage." Alana picked up the paper. She studied the names. "Stanford," she mused. "They are leveraged to the hilt. I heard rumors on the street that they are trying to refinance their flagship property in Manhattan. The banks are getting skittish." "He is desperate," I said. "He is trying to steal my granddaughter's trust fund to cover his liquidity crisis. But before he does that, he destroyed my son's business to force him into submission. I need proof, Alana. I need to know who he paid off to cancel those contracts. I need the paper trail." Alana smiled. It was a shark's smile. It was the smile of a woman who enjoyed tearing apart corrupt empires. "Forensic accounting is not just about math, Jem," she said, echoing the lesson I had taught her 15 years ago. "It is about psychology. Follow the greed." "Exactly," I said. "Richard is arrogant. He thinks he is untouchable. He probably didn't even hide the bribes well. He thinks no one is looking. I will find it," Alana promised. "If money moved, I will see the tracks. But Jem, this is expensive work. My retainer has gone up since you left the game." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. I slid it across the table. It was $10,000 in cash. "Start with this," I said. "There is more where that came from. Just get me the evidence. And Alana, do it fast. He gave my son a deadline of 5 o'clock today." Alana took the envelope. She didn't count it. She knew better. "I will have a preliminary report in 3 hours," she said, standing up. "Welcome back to the war, Jem." She walked out, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and danger in the air. I watched her go. Alana was the best forensic auditor I had ever trained. She could find a missing penny in a billion-dollar ledger. I sat there sipping my terrible coffee. I thought about Tyrell. I thought about his belief that I was just a mailman. It was a lie I had told to protect him. I wanted him to be free of the dark world I had lived in. I wanted him to build beautiful things, not tear down ugly ones. But sometimes to protect the things you build, you have to be willing to burn down the things that threaten them. I opened my black notebook. It was filled with codes and account numbers. My war chest. I wasn't just a mailman. I was the ghost auditor. I was the man who had brought down the Enron subsidiaries that no one knew existed. I was the man who had found the hidden assets of the Sinaloa cartel's money launderers. Richard Stanford was a small fish in a small pond. He just didn't know he was swimming with a megalodon. I picked up my burner phone. I dialed a number I hadn't used in a decade. "Hello," a voice answered, cautious and rough. "It is Jem," I said. There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Well, I will be damned. The ghost returns. What do you need?" "I need a favor," I said. "I need to buy some debt. A lot of it." I looked out the window of the diner. The sun was shining, but a storm was coming. Richard Stanford wanted to play the heavy. He wanted to use money as a weapon. He was about to find out that he was bringing a knife to a nuclear war. "I am coming for you, Richard," I whispered to the empty booth, "and I am going to take everything." The police raid had failed, but Richard Stanford was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who pivoted. He treated human lives like bad investments. If one strategy did not yield a return, he liquidated the asset and moved capital elsewhere. The drug planting was a blunt instrument. It was high risk and high reward. Now that it had blown up in his face, he switched to a slower, more insidious poison. He decided to attack my mind, or rather, he decided to manufacture the illusion that my mind was failing. It started with whispers. I heard it from Mrs. Gable across the street when I was checking my mail. She asked me with exaggerated slowness if I knew what day it was. She looked at me with pity bordering on disgust. Richard had been talking. He was spreading the narrative that the drug raid was a result of my confusion. He told anyone who would listen that poor Jem had probably found something on his mail route years ago and forgotten about it, or that I was hoarding dangerous substances because I didn't know what they were. He was painting a portrait of a senile old man who was a danger to himself and others, especially a danger to a 9-year-old girl. Then came the legal threat. Alana intercepted an email Richard sent to his family lawyer. The subject line was involuntary conservatorship. He wasn't just trying to isolate me, he was trying to take control of me. If he could prove to a judge that I was mentally incompetent, he could have me placed in a state-run facility. He could seize my assets, which he assumed were meager to pay for my care, but most importantly, he could legally bar me from seeing Zoe. He could argue that my presence was traumatizing her. He could sever the lifeline I offered to Tyrell. I sat in my home office, which looked like a dusty storage room to the naked eye, but was actually a high-tech surveillance hub. I watched the monitors. I knew Richard wouldn't rely solely on rumors. He needed physical evidence. He needed a documented history of dangerous behavior. He needed incidents. And since I wasn't providing any, he decided to create them himself. I had a schedule. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, I drove my rattling truck to the community center for a seniors' coffee hour. It was part of my cover. I drank bad coffee and listened to complaints about the weather. It was the perfect window for Richard. On Thursday morning, I left the house at 8:30 sharp. I drove 2 blocks and then circled back, parking in an alleyway behind a row of abandoned shops that overlooked my street. I pulled out my tablet and accessed the hidden cameras I had installed inside my own home years ago. They were military-grade pinhole cameras invisible to the naked eye. One in the kitchen, one in the living room, one in the hallway. At 9:15, a silver sedan pulled up. It wasn't Richard's Porsche. It was a rental. Smart. He was learning. Richard got out wearing gloves and a baseball cap. He looked ridiculous, like a banker trying to cosplay as a cat burglar. He walked up to my back door. He didn't pick the lock. He used a key. I zoomed in on the screen. It was a copy of the spare key I had given Tyrell for emergencies. My son must have left it on his counter and Richard had swiped it. The betrayal stung, but I knew Tyrell wasn't complicit. He was just collateral damage in Richard's war. Richard entered my kitchen. I watched in high definition as he went to work. He wasn't stealing. He was rearranging. He opened my cupboards and moved the coffee mugs to the refrigerator. He took my blood pressure medication from the counter and emptied half the pills into the sink, washing them away, then hid the bottle deep inside a box of cereal. He was setting the stage for a medical crisis. If I missed my meds, my blood pressure would spike. If I couldn't find them, I would seem frantic and confused. Then he did something that made my knuckles turn white as I gripped the steering wheel of my truck. He walked over to the gas stove. He turned the knob on the rear burner. He didn't ignite it. He just turned it enough to let the gas hiss out. It was a slow leak. Not enough to blow the house up in 5 minutes, but enough to fill the kitchen with fumes by the time I came home. He wanted me to walk in and pass out. Or better yet, he wanted to come over later for a surprise visit and find me unconscious or dazed, surrounded by the smell of gas. He would call the fire department. He would play the hero. He would tell the paramedics, "Look, he left the gas on again. He is losing it. He is going to kill us all. It was attempted murder. It was calculated, cold-blooded attempted murder disguised as the negligence of a decaying mind." Richard moved to the living room. He knocked a framed photo of Zoe off the side table, shattering the glass. He left it there on the floor. He pulled cushions off the sofa and threw them haphazardly. He wanted it to look like I had had an episode of rage or confusion before I left. He checked his watch. He looked satisfied. He exited the back door, locking it behind him. I waited until his rental car disappeared. Then I drove back to my house. I didn't go inside immediately. I walked to the back and shut off the main gas valve outside. I opened all the windows from the outside using a latch tool I kept in the shed. I let the house air out for an hour. When I finally went inside, the smell was faint but lingering. I cleaned up the glass photo frame, but I didn't fix the cushions. I retrieved my medication bottle from the cereal box. I checked the count. I had a backup supply in my safe, so I wasn't worried about my health. I was worried about the narrative. I knew they were coming back. They needed an audience for the second act of their play. Sure enough, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the silver Porsche pulled into my driveway. Richard and Pamela. They were here for the welfare check. I sat in my armchair amidst the disarray Richard had created. I unbuttoned the top of my flannel shirt and messed up my hair. I took out my false tooth, effectively giving me a gap-toothed, slightly unhinged appearance. I stared at a blank wall, mumbling to myself. The door opened. They didn't knock. Jem Richard called out, his voice dripping with fake concern. "We were calling you." You didn't answer. They walked into the living room. Pamela gasped when she saw the cushions on the floor. She pressed a hand to her chest. "Oh my God. Richard, look at this place." Richard walked over to me. He sniffed the air. "Do you smell gas, Pamela?" "I smell it," she said, her eyes wide. I looked up at them slowly. I let my eyes drift past Richard as if I couldn't quite focus on him. "The mailman didn't come today," I said, my voice raspy and thin. I waited for the letter from the president. Richard smiled. It was a shark's smile. He turned to Pamela. "See, he is completely gone. He thinks he is waiting for mail from the president." Jem Richard said, loudly enunciating every word like he was speaking to a toddler. "It is Richard, your son's father-in-law. Do you know who I am?" I squinted at him. "You look like the tax collector," I said. "I paid my taxes. In 1984. I have the receipt. It is in the shoebox." Pamela pulled out her phone. She started recording. This was it. The evidence they needed. Richard walked into the kitchen. "Oh my God," he shouted from the other room. "The stove, the burner is on." He left the gas on Pamela. He could have killed the whole neighborhood. He came back into the living room, shaking his head. "This is it. We can't ignore this anymore. He is a danger to himself. We have to call social services. We have to get an emergency order." I stood up, shaky on my legs. I shuffled toward Pamela. "Who is this lady?" I asked, pointing a trembling finger at her. "Is this the nurse? I don't want my sponge bath. The water is too cold." Pamela recoiled, visibly disgusted. "I am not a nurse, you old fool. I am Pamela. Betty," I said, nodding. "You look like my cousin Betty. She stole my chickens." Richard was typing furiously on his phone, probably texting his lawyer. Or Tyrell. "Look at him," he said to Pamela. "He doesn't even know where he is. This is dementia rapid onset. It explains everything. The drugs in the bear, he probably forgot he put them there. He probably thought it was sugar." I shuffled closer to Richard. I grabbed his lapel with a surprisingly strong grip for a senile man. "Did you see the cat?" I whispered, leaning in close. "The big silver cat. It came in my house. It moved my coffee cups. It put my pills in the cereal." "Bad cat." Richard shoved me away. "Get off me, Jem. You are losing your mind." He brushed his suit jacket as if my touch had contaminated him. "We are leaving," he announced. "We have seen enough. We are going to get you help, Jem, whether you want it or not." They turned to leave. They had what they came for. A video of me acting crazy. A witness to the gas leak. A house in disarray. They thought they had the final nail in my coffin. I watched them go. I stood in the doorway and waved. "Goodbye, Betty," I called out. "Don't steal the chickens." As soon as the Porsche turned the corner, I straightened my back. I popped my tooth back in. I walked to my office and sat down at the computer. I pulled up the footage from the morning. There was Richard in 4K resolution entering my home unlawfully. There was Richard tampering with my medication. There was Richard turning on the gas stove, creating a potentially lethal hazard. I saved the file. I encrypted it. I sent a copy to a secure cloud server and another directly to Alana Hart's inbox. I picked up my phone and dialed Alana. "Did you get the file?" I asked, my voice crisp and commanding, the old man gone. "I am watching it now," Alana said. Her voice was cold. "This is breaking and entering, tampering with a consumer product. Reckless endangerment. Attempted murder if we can prove intent to cause an explosion. Jem, this guy is sloppy. He is arrogant," I corrected. "He thinks I am a bug. He doesn't think he needs to be careful when he steps on a bug. He gave us the ammunition," Alana said. "We can file charges right now. We can have him arrested tonight." "No," I said. "Not yet. He thinks he won. He thinks he has the evidence to lock me away. Let him file the petition for guardianship. Let him stand in front of a judge and swear under oath that I am incompetent. Let him commit perjury. I want him to hang himself with his own rope." I have more news, Alana said. I traced the suppliers for his hotel renovations. He is using shell companies to inflate construction costs and siphon money out of the business. He is embezzling from his own shareholders. But here is the kicker. He is laundering money for the Albanian mob in New Jersey. That is who he owes. That is why he is desperate. The Albanians, I mused. That explained the panic. They don't sue you when you don't pay. They break your legs. Or worse. Richard Stanford was walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers, and he just tried to push me in. Let him proceed with the court case, I told Alana. Prepare the counterfiling, but I want to have a little fun first. He invited himself into my house. I think it is time I returned the favor. I am going to host a dinner party, Alana, a reconciliation dinner. You are going to cook for him, Alana asked, skeptical. I am, I said, and I am going to serve a very special vintage. I hung up. I looked at the screen where Richard was currently frozen in a frame, his hand on the gas knob, a sneer on his face. You wanted to gaslight me, Richard, Bert whispered. You wanted to make me question my reality. But you forgot one thing. I am the one who writes the reality. I went to the kitchen. I turned on the stove. This time, I lit the flame. I put a kettle on for tea. I had a dinner menu to plan. And revenge, as they say, is a dish best served cold. Or in this case with a side of absolute humiliation. I waited exactly 3 days after the gaslighting incident to make the call. I let Richard and Pamela stew in their victory. I let them believe that their plan had worked and that I was terrified, confused, and ready to surrender. When I finally dialed Richard's number, my voice was a masterpiece of frailty. I told him I was tired. I told him I couldn't keep track of things anymore. I told him I wanted to discuss Zoe's future and hand over some family heirlooms before my mind completely went. It was the white flag they had been waiting for. They agreed to come to dinner at my house. I spent the afternoon preparing the stage. My house was already modest, but I enhanced the poverty. I loosened the screws on the dining chairs so they would wobble. I replaced the light bulbs with lower wattage ones to make the room feel dim and dingy. I wanted them to feel superior. I wanted them to feel like royalty visiting a peasant's hovel because arrogance is the most effective truth serum in the world. When the silver Porsche rolled up my gravel driveway at 7 o'clock, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across my unkempt lawn. Richard and Pamela stepped out looking like they were dressed for a gala in Manhattan, not a dinner in a drafty wooden house. Richard wore a suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, and Pamela was dripping in gold. They looked at my house with undisguised revulsion, wrinkling their noses, as if the very air around my property was contaminated. I opened the door before they could knock, wearing my most faded cardigan and shuffling my feet. Welcome, I said, my voice raspy. Thank you for coming. I know it is not what you are used to. Richard stepped inside without wiping his feet. It certainly isn't Jim, he said, scanning the peeling wallpaper in the hallway. But it has a certain rustic charm, I suppose. Aye, like a museum exhibit on the Great Depression. Pamela laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. Oh, Richard, stop. Jem does the best he can with his limited resources. Don't you, Jem? I led them to the dining room. The table was set with mismatched plates and chipped glasses. I had prepared a traditional meal. Oxtails braised for 8 hours in a rich, dark gravy, collard greens with smoked turkey neck and cornbread made from my grandmother's recipe in a cast-iron skillet. It was soul food. It was the food of my history, and I knew exactly what they would think of it. Please sit, I said, gesturing to the wobbly chairs. I made something special. Richard looked at the pot of oxtails as if I had served him boiled shoe leather. What is this? He asked, poking at the meat with his fork. Oxtails, I said proudly. And greens. Good for the blood. Richard pushed his plate away a few inches. Heavy, isn't it? He said with a sneer. Very greasy. I have to watch my cholesterol, Jim. This kind of food is why your people have such high rates of heart disease, isn't it? All that fat and salt. It clogs the brain too, I imagine. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white, but I kept my face blank. My people, I repeated softly. You know what I mean, Pamela chimed in, waving her hand dismissively. Poor people, people who don't know about nutrition. We usually eat grilled salmon or a light salad. But thank you for the effort. I am sure it is very filling. They ate like they were doing me a favor, taking tiny bites and making faces at each other when they thought I wasn't looking. They insulted my home, my cooking, and my life with every breath. They felt safe. They felt powerful. They were in the home of a senile old man who was about to sign over his rights. I cleared the plates, pretending not to notice that they had barely touched the food. "Now for a drink," I said. "I don't have much, but a friend gave me a bottle of wine a long time ago. I found it in the cellar. I hope it hasn't turned to vinegar." I walked to the sideboard and picked up the bottle I had placed there earlier. It was covered in a thick layer of dust that I had carefully applied. I shuffled back to the table and set it down. It was a Chateau Petrus 1989, one of the most legendary vintages in history, a bottle that currently sold for over $5,000. I had received a case of it as a bonus from a hedge fund manager whose assets I had saved from a hostile takeover in the 90s. Richard looked at the dusty bottle and rolled his eyes. "Supermarket wine," he muttered to Pamela. "Probably has a screw top." I pulled out a corkscrew and opened the bottle with clumsy hands, feigning a struggle. I poured a generous amount into Richard's chipped glass and then into Pamela's. The aroma hit the air immediately. Rich, complex notes of black truffle, dark berries, and mocha filled the small dining room. Richard froze. His nostrils flared. He was a snob, but he knew wine. He looked at the glass confused. He picked it up and swirled it, watching the heavy legs of the wine coat the sides. He took a sip. His eyes widened. He held the liquid in his mouth, letting it wash over his palate. He swallowed, and for a second the mask of arrogance slipped, leaving only pure shock. "This is," he started, his voice losing its condescending edge. "This is incredible. Is it?" I asked, pouring myself a glass of water. "I don't drink much wine. I thought it might be old." Richard grabbed the bottle and wiped the dust off the label with his silk handkerchief. When he saw the name, his jaw dropped. "Petrus, 1989. Jem, do you have any idea what this is?" he demanded, his voice rising. "This is a $5,000 bottle of wine. Where did you get this? Did you steal it from a package on your route?" I chuckled, a dry, senile sound. "Steal it? No. A man gave it to me, a long time ago. I helped him clean out his garage. He said it was payment for taking out the trash." Richard looked at me with a mixture of greed and fury. He couldn't reconcile the reality. He was drinking liquid gold in a shack poured by a man he considered beneath him, but the wine was too good to resist. He drank the glass in 3 large gulps and poured himself another, filling it to the brim. "What a waste," he muttered to Pamela. "Giving a bottle like this to a man who thinks it is payment for cleaning a garage. He probably used the rest of the case for cooking vinegar." He drank more. The alcohol combined with the rich food hit him fast. His face flushed. He loosened his tie. This was the moment. The predator was fed and watered. Now he would get careless. There was a knock at the door. "Who is that?" Pamela asked, jumping slightly. "Oh, that must be my neighbor Sarah," I said, standing up slowly. "She comes by sometimes to check on me. She is a sweet girl, just moved in down the road." I went to the door and opened it. Alana Hart stood there. She had transformed. Gone was the power suit and the severe bun. She was wearing an oversized knit sweater, leggings, and glasses. Her hair was messy. She looked like a tired grad student or a struggling artist. She held an empty measuring cup. "Hi, Mr. Jem," she said, her voice pitched higher, softer. "I am so sorry to bother you. I am baking brownies and I realized I am out of sugar. Could I borrow a cup?" "Come in, child. Come in," I said, ushering her into the dining room. "Richard, Pamela, this is Sarah. She looks out for me." Alana walked in, clutching her cup, looking shy and overwhelmed by the presence of the wealthy couple. "Hi," she squeaked. "I didn't know you had company. Nice to meet you." Richard barely glanced at her. He was on his 3rd glass of Petrus. "Just grab your sugar and go," he grunted. "We are discussing family business." "I will get it for you," I said, heading to the kitchen. "Sarah, why don't you wait here for a second?" Alana nodded and stood near the sideboard, blending into the background. She pulled her phone out of her pocket, casually holding it at her waist. The recording app was already running. I stayed in the kitchen, rattling jars, making noise, taking my time. I wanted them to talk. Richard poured more wine. "This is the only good thing in this godforsaken house," he said, slurring slightly. "At least we will get something out of this trip." Pamela looked nervous. "Richard, keep your voice down. The girl is right there." "She is a nobody," Richard scoffed. "Look at her. She probably lives in a trailer. Who cares what she hears? She wouldn't understand high finance if it hit her in the face." He took another long drink, draining the glass. "I need this," he exhaled. "God, I needed this. The pressure is killing me, Pam. The Albanians are calling every day now." The Albanians, Pamela whispered, harsh and fearful. You said you handled them. You said the refinance went through. It didn't go through. Richard snapped, slamming the glass down. The bank saw the books. They saw the shell companies. They froze the application. I have zero liquidity, Pam. Zero. I had to move the payroll account just to cover the interest on the street loan. If we don't get that trust fund released, if we don't get Zoe, I am a dead man. Alana stood still, her thumb hovering over her phone screen, adjusting the gain on the microphone. So the plan is still on? Pamela asked. Of course it is on, Richard hissed. We get the old man declared incompetent. We get Tyrell to sign over custody. We ship the girl to Switzerland. My contact at the bank in Zurich says as long as I have the guardianship papers, he can release the funds as an educational withdrawal. $2 million tax-free. It covers the Albanians and gives us operating capital for the next quarter. But what if Jem fights back? Pamela asked, looking toward the kitchen. Fight back. Richard laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. Look at him, Pam. He is feeding us $5,000 wine because he thinks it is trash. He doesn't know what day it is. He is a bug. And I am the boot. I just need to crush him a little harder. Tomorrow I file the petition. I already bribed Dr. Evans to sign the affidavit. $5,000, and he swears Jem has advanced dementia. It is done. I walked back into the room holding a bag of sugar. Here you go, Sarah, I said. Thank you, Mr. Jem, Alana said, taking the bag. It was nice meeting you folks. She scurried out the door. As soon as she was outside, she sent me a text. Got it all. Every word. The bribery, the fraud, the Albanians. He is done. I sat back down at the table. Richard was staring at the empty wine bottle. Is there any more? He demanded. No, I said. That was the last one. Richard sighed, burping loudly. Well then, let's get down to business. You said you wanted to discuss Zoe. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had eaten my food, drunk my wine, and plotted the destruction of my family and my own home. Yes, I said, my voice suddenly steady, the tremor gone. I want to discuss Zoe, and I want to discuss the Albanians. Richard froze. The glass stopped halfway to his mouth. He blinked, trying to clear the wine fog. What did you say? He whispered. I said I want to discuss your cash flow problem, Richard, I said, leaning forward, my eyes locking onto his. And the $5,000 you paid Dr. Evans, and the fact that you are laundering money through your hotel renovations. Richard dropped the glass. It shattered on the floor. He stared at me, and for the first time he didn't see the mailman. He saw the ghost. Who are you? He breathed. I am the boot, I said, and you are the bug. The shattered remains of the $5,000 wine glass lay on the floor, a sparkling testament to Richard Stanford's terror. He had fled my house with Pamela dragging her by the arm, leaving behind the scent of fear and expensive cologne. I swept the shards into a dustpan, my movements slow and rhythmic. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. I knew Richard. I knew his type. He was a cornered rat. And rats, when cornered, do not surrender. They bite. They claw. They do anything to survive. He would not stop because I had scared him. Fear would only make him more desperate. He needed a way out, and he needed it now. The front door opened again. Alana stepped back inside. She had dropped the disguise. The glasses were gone, and her posture was back to that of the predator I had trained. She locked the door behind her and threw a heavy manila envelope onto the dining table. It landed with a thud that echoed in the quiet room. You were right, Jem, she said, her voice devoid of the playful tone she had used as the neighbor Sarah. It is worse than we thought. It is not just about the hotels. It is not just about the mob. It is about the timeline. I sat down and opened the envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a legal document dated 15 years ago. It was a last will and testament. But it wasn't Richard's. It was Eleanor Vance's, Kimberly's mother. I remembered her vaguely, a quiet woman who had died of cancer when Kimberly was just 20. Richard had played the grieving widower perfectly at the funeral, but I remembered the dry eyes and the quick remarriage to Pamela less than a year later. Look at page 4, Alana said, pointing a manicured finger at a highlighted paragraph. I read the text. My eyes narrowed. It was a trust clause. Eleanor Vance had left a specific bequest, not to her husband, not even directly to her daughter, who she likely knew was under Richard's thumb. She had left it to her future grandchildren. $2 million, I whispered. $2 million parked in a high-yield bond fund since 2005, Alana confirmed. With compound interest and market growth, that fund is sitting closer to $3 million today. It is untouchable, Jem. Eleanor knew who she was married to. She locked it down tight. The trustee is a third-party firm in Boston. Richard cannot touch the principal. Kimberly cannot touch it. It is exclusively for the benefit of the issue of Kimberly Stanford. Zoe. I looked at the picture of Zoe on my mantle. She was an heiress, and she didn't even know it. She was walking around with a target on her back worth $3 million. But why now, I asked. Why the rush? Zoe is 9. She can't access that money until she is 21 or 25. That is what I thought too, Alana said, pacing the small room. So I dug into the bypass clauses. Every trust has an emergency release valve. Usually it is for medical emergencies or extreme hardship. But this one has a very specific educational clause. She pulled another paper from the stack. It was a printout of the Swiss boarding school Richard had mentioned in the recording. The Institut Le Rose, the most expensive school in the world. Read the fine print on the trust, Alana urged. I read it. In the event that the beneficiary requires specialized education abroad, the legal guardian may petition the trustee for the release of funds to cover tuition, living expenses, and housing for the guardian if relocation is necessary. Housing for the guardian. I slammed the paper down on the table. It was a loophole big enough to drive a truck filled with stolen money through. He doesn't want to send her to Switzerland to learn French, I said, my voice trembling with rage. He wants to send her there so he can become her foreign guardian. Exactly, Alana said. Once he has custody and moves her to Switzerland, he can petition the trustee to release millions for housing and living expenses. He will rent a chalet for $10,000 a month and bill the trust for $50,000. He will siphon that account dry in 2 years under the guise of taking care of Zoe. He will use that money to pay off the Albanians and recapitalize his hotels. He is using his granddaughter as a mule to smuggle $3 million out of a protected trust and into his own pocket. The sheer depravity of it made me nauseous. He wasn't just stealing, he was trafficking. He was planning to uproot a 9-year-old girl from her parents, take her to a foreign country, isolate her, and use her existence to launder money. And when the money ran out, what then? Would he send her back? Would he abandon her? This explains everything I said. The drugs, the gaslighting, the desperate need for full custody. He cannot access the funds if Tyrell has rights. He needs to be the sole decision maker. He needs Tyrell in prison and me in a nursing home, so there is no one left to object when he petitions the court to move her to Europe. And he is running out of time, Alana added. I checked the debt covenants on his hotel loans. He is in default as of yesterday. The Albanians gave him a grace period until the end of the month. That is 5 days, Jem. 5 days before they start breaking knees. He is not just greedy, he is terrified. That is why he planted the drugs. He needed an immediate arrest. He needed emergency custody granted ex parte without a hearing. He needed to be on a plane with Zoe by the weekend. I stood up and walked to the window. The night was dark, but my mind was burning with a cold white fire. I thought about the fear in Zoe's eyes when she held that bear. I thought about Tyrell weeping at my kitchen table. I thought about Kimberly trapped in a house with parents who saw her daughter as a financial asset. They weren't people to Richard. We weren't humans. We were line items on a balance sheet. Liabilities to be liquidated or assets to be leveraged. He thought he could write us off. He thought he could balance his books with our lives. He wants liquidity, I said, turning back to Alana. He is desperate for cash. He is desperate to clear his balance sheet so the banks don't foreclose and the mob doesn't kill him. Yes, Alana said. He is bleeding out. Then let's pull the plug, I said. Alana looked at me confused. What do you mean? I mean, I am done playing defense, I said. I am done recording conversations and dodging traps. I am done waiting for him to make a mistake. He wants a war over money. Fine, I have money. I have clean money. And I know how to use it. I walked over to the safe in the floor of my closet. I spun the dial and opened it. I pulled out a black leather portfolio. Inside were the bearer bonds and the account access keys to my offshore holdings. $50 million of accumulated wealth from 40 years of catching thieves. Alana, I said, my voice low and steady. I want you to make some calls. Tonight. Right now. I want you to contact the bank holding the mortgage on the Stanford Hotel Group. I want you to contact the suppliers who are waiting on invoices. I want you to contact the private lenders he is trying to court. To do what Alana asked, her eyes widening. I want to buy his debt, I said. All of it. Alana gasped. Jem, that is tens of millions of dollars. That is risky. These are toxic assets. The hotels are failing. You will lose money. I don't care about the return on investment, I said. I am not buying an asset. I am buying a weapon. I want to own the paper that owns him. I want to be the one holding the mortgage when he wakes up tomorrow morning. I want to be the one he has to beg for an extension. I want to be the face he sees when he realizes he has lost everything. Alana stared at me. She saw the look in my eyes. It was the look of a man who was willing to burn his own house down to kill the termite infestation. You want to foreclose, she whispered. I want to crush him, I corrected. I want to buy the bank debt. I want to buy the construction liens. I want to buy the supplier invoices. I want to consolidate every single penny he owes into one entity, me. And then I am going to call the note due. Immediately. Alana took a deep breath. She pulled out her phone. She opened her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. The bank will sell, she said, typing furiously. They are desperate to get this bad debt off their books. If you offer them 80 cents on the dollar for the commercial mortgage, they will bite your hand off. The suppliers will take 50 cents just to get some cash flow. We can structure the acquisition through your shell company in Delaware, the Ghost Capital Group. Do it, I said. What about the Albanians? Alana asked, pausing. You can't buy their debt. They don't do paperwork. No, I said. But when I foreclose on the hotels, Richard loses his collateral. He loses his income stream. He loses his ability to pay them back. I am not going to fight the mob, Alana. I am just going to make sure Richard has no way to pay them. Let them deal with him. He made his bed with vipers. Let him sleep in it. Alana nodded. She respected the play. It was brutal. It was total war. I will need authorization for the wire transfers, she said. This is going to drain your liquid reserves, Jem. You are putting your entire retirement on the line. If this goes south, you are back to living on your postal pension for real. I looked around my small, drafty house. I looked at the mismatched furniture and the peeling wallpaper. I didn't care about the money. I never did. The money was just a scorecard. It was just a tool. And right now it was a hammer. Authorize it, I said. Every cent. Empty the Cayman accounts. Liquidate the bond portfolio. Wire the funds to the escrow account. I want those papers signed by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. When Richard wakes up, I want to own the roof over his head. Alana hit the enter key. The screen flashed. Transfer initiated. It is done, she said. I sat back in my chair. I felt a strange calm wash over me. It was the calm of the executioner. Richard Stanford had spent his life thinking money made him a god. He thought it gave him the right to trample on people like me. He thought it gave him the right to buy and sell children. Tomorrow, he was going to learn a lesson about the true nature of power. Power isn't having money. Power is having the will to use it to protect the people you love. He tried to bury me, I said softly. He didn't know I was a seed. And tomorrow, Alana, tomorrow the harvest begins. We sat there in the dim light of the dining room waiting for the banks to open, waiting for the wire transfers to clear, waiting for the sun to rise on a new world order. Richard Stanford was sleeping in his mansion dreaming of Swiss boarding schools and stolen millions. He had no idea that the old mailman he had mocked the bug he had tried to crush had just bought the boot. And I was about to step down hard. The phone call that shattered my son's life came at 8 in the morning just as we were finishing a silent breakfast. It was the bank. The mortgage on Tyrell's house and the commercial loan for his architecture firm had been called due immediately. The voice on the other end was robotic and cold, stating that due to a reassessment of his creditworthiness and the liens placed against his property, the bank was exercising its right to accelerate the debt. He had until noon to pay the full balance of $240,000, or the foreclosure process would begin instantly. They would lock the doors of his office. They would put a notice on his home. They would take everything. Tyrell dropped the phone. His face was the color of ash. He looked at Kimberly, who was sitting at the table wringing her hands, and then he looked at me. "It is over, Dad," he whispered. "They are taking it all." I knew exactly who was behind this. This wasn't a standard bank procedure. This was Richard Stanford pulling strings from the shadows, using his connections to squeeze the last breath of air out of my son's lungs. He wanted Tyrell desperate. He wanted him on his knees. "We are going to the bank," I said, standing up and putting on my faded canvas jacket. "Get your keys, Tyrell." We drove in silence. Tyrell's hands were shaking so hard on the steering wheel I thought he might crash. When we arrived at the First City Bank downtown, The silver Porsche was already there, parked in the loading zone with the hazard lights flashing. Richard Stanford didn't obey parking laws. Those were for little people. Inside the bank, the air conditioning was freezing. Richard and Pamela were sitting in the glass-walled office of the branch manager looking like they owned the building. When we walked in, Richard stood up and opened the door, ushering us in with a shark-like grin. "Right on time," he said, checking his Rolex. "I was just telling Mr. Henderson here how unfortunate this whole situation is. It is a shame to see a young family lose their home because of poor financial management." Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, was a sweaty man in an ill-fitting suit who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. He looked at Tyrell with pity but shrugged. "My hands are tied, Mr. Cross," he said to Tyrell. "The risk assessment came from corporate. We need the full balance. Today." Tyrell sank into a chair, defeated. "I don't have $200,000, he choked out. "You know I don't." Richard stepped forward, placing a hand on Tyrell's shoulder. It was a gesture of dominance, not comfort. "I know you don't, son," Richard said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "But luckily for you, family sticks together. I am willing to pay off the entire debt. Right now. I have a cashier's check ready." He pulled a check from his inside pocket and waved it in the air. Tyrell looked up, hope warring with terror in his eyes. "You would do that?" "Of course," Richard said. "But there is a condition. A small administrative detail we need to handle first." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out the custody agreement, the same one he had shown Tyrell before, the one that sold Zoe for the price of a mortgage. "Sign this," Richard said, sliding the paper across the mahogany desk. "Grant Pamela and me full permanent custody of Zoe. We will take her to Europe. We will give her the best education money can buy. And in exchange, you get to keep your little house and your failing business. You get a clean slate." "It is a generous offer, Tyrell, the only offer you are going to get." Kimberly began to sob softly in the corner. "Mom, please," she whispered to Pamela. "Don't do this. Don't take my baby." Pamela ignored her, checking her reflection in the glass of a framed diploma. "It is for her own good, Kimberly," she said. "You two are clearly incapable of providing stability. Look at you. You're getting foreclosed on. We are saving her." Tyrell looked at the paper. He looked at the check in Richard's hand. He picked up a pen. His hand was trembling violently. He felt he had no choice. He believed he was saving his family from homelessness. He didn't see any other way out. I stepped forward. "Put the pen down, Tyrell," I said. Richard spun around, his eyes narrowing. He had ignored me until now, treating me like a piece of furniture. "Stay out of this, Jem," he snapped. "This is adult business. Go sit in the lobby and read a magazine. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me," I said, my voice calm and level. "That is my son. That is my granddaughter. And you are trying to buy a human being in a bank office." "I am saving them," Richard spat. "What can you do, Jem? Can you write a check for $250,000? Can you save his house? No. You can't even afford a new transmission for your truck. So shut your mouth and let him sign." I looked at Mr. Henderson, the bank manager. He was watching the exchange with discomfort, but he didn't intervene. He was afraid of Richard, too. Richard was a big client. I was just a nuisance in a flannel shirt. "I am asking you to remove this gentleman," Mr. Henderson said to me, pointing at the door. "You are disrupting a private meeting. If you don't leave, I will call security." I didn't move. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. "I am not leaving," I said, "and Tyrell is not signing that paper." I pulled out a small leather card holder. It wasn't the Velcro wallet I usually carried. It was Italian leather, sleek and black. I opened it and extracted a single card. It was made of anodized titanium. It was heavy cold and matte black. There were no numbers on the front, just a name laser-etched in silver. Jeremiah Cross. And the emblem of the centurion. The black card. The real one. Not the one you get for having good credit. The one you get by invitation only when your net worth crosses a threshold that most people can't even imagine. I stepped up to the desk and dropped the card on the mahogany surface. It made a distinctive, heavy clink sound that silenced the room. "Run it," I said to Henderson. Richard stared at the card. He laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. "What is this, a library card? A gift card to Home Depot? Get real, Jim. You are embarrassing yourself." Henderson picked up the card. He frowned. He turned it over. He felt the weight of it. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he was about to faint. He looked at the name on the card, and then he looked at me. He really looked at me for the first time. He saw past the flannel and the work boots. He saw the eyes of a man who could buy this bank and turn it into a parking lot. "Mr. Cross," he stammered, his voice shaking. I didn't know. I apologize. I had no idea you were a client of this standing." "Run the card," I repeated softly. "Pay off the mortgage, pay off the business loan, pay off the penalties, clear it all." But Henderson said, looking at his computer screen, his hands flying across the keyboard, "Sir, the balance is over $240,000. Do you want to authorize a transfer from—" "I don't want a transfer," I said. "I want it paid now." "Swipe it." Henderson swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. Right away." He ran the card through the machine. There was a beep. "Approved." Richard stood there frozen, his mouth hung open. He looked from the machine to me as if he were witnessing a magic trick he couldn't explain. "That is fake," Richard shouted, pointing at the machine. "The machine is broken. He hacked it. He is a fraud. That old man doesn't have $2 to rub together, let alone 200,000. Arrest him, Henderson. He is stealing from the bank." Henderson stood up. He walked around the desk. He didn't look at Richard. He looked at me. He bowed slightly, a gesture of total submission to the kind of wealth that makes bankers tremble. "The transaction is cleared," Mr. Cross Henderson said, handing me the receipt with both hands. "Your son's debts are paid in full. The liens are released immediately. I will have the deed prepared and sent to you by messenger today. Is there anything else I can do for you, sir? Perhaps some coffee or a private room?" I took the receipt and handed it to Tyrell. "Burn that custody paper, son," I said. Tyrell stared at the receipt. He looked at me with tears streaming down his face. "Dad," he whispered. "How?" "We will talk later," I said. I turned to Richard. He was backing away, his face purple with rage and confusion. Pamela was clutching her pearls, looking like she was about to have a stroke. You... Richard sputtered. "Who are you?" I walked toward him. He took a step back, hitting the wall. I invaded his personal space, leaning in close so only he could hear the steel in my voice. "I am the man who just bought your life, Richard," I said. "What are you talking about?" he hissed. "You paid his debt. Congratulations. You wasted your retirement savings. You are broke now. I still have my hotels. I still have my money. I will crush you." I smiled. It was the smile of the ghost auditor. "Actually, Richard," I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out another document. "I didn't just pay Tyrell's debt. While I was here, I decided to do a little shopping. I unfolded the paper. It was a transfer of ownership agreement for a commercial debt portfolio. I bought the distressed debt package from this bank this morning," I said. "My lawyer, Alana Hart, finalized it 5 minutes ago. The bank was very eager to offload some toxic assets, specifically the commercial mortgages on the Stanford Hotel Group." Richard's eyes bulged. "No," he wheezed. "That is impossible. That is tens of millions of dollars." "It was expensive," I admitted, "but I got a discount, 80 cents on the dollar." "You are a high-risk borrower, Richard. You are in default. You missed your last 3 payments." I held up the paper so he could see his own signature on the original loan documents, which were now attached to my purchase agreement. "I am your creditor now, Richard. I own your mortgage. I own your construction loans. I own the paper on your house. And as of this moment, I am accelerating the debt, just like the bank did to Tyrell." I checked my watch. "It is 9:30 a.m., I said. "You have until the end of the business day to pay me $17 million. If you don't, I am foreclosing. On the hotels, on your mansion, on your cars, on everything." Richard slid down the wall until he hit the floor. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "17 million, he whispered. "I don't have it. You know I don't have it." "I know," I said coldly. "And I know you can't get it from the trust fund because you don't have Zoe. And you can't get it from the Albanians because you already owe them." I leaned down, getting face to face with him. "You tried to take my family, Richard. You tried to take my dignity. You thought because I was a mailman I was weak. You thought because I was quiet I was stupid." I tapped the titanium card against his chest. "You forgot the first rule of business. Always know who is sitting across the table." I stood up and turned to Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, please escort Mr. Stanford off the premises," I said. "I believe he is trespassing on my time. And call the foreclosure department. Tell them to start the paperwork on the Stanford properties. I want the eviction notices posted by tomorrow morning." Henderson nodded vigorously. "Security," he called out. "Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Stanford out." 2 burly guards appeared. They grabbed Richard by the arms and hauled him up. He didn't fight. He was in shock. He looked at me with the eyes of a man who had seen a ghost. Pamela started screaming. "This is illegal." "You can't do this. Do you know who we are?" I watched them get dragged out through the glass doors of the bank. The lobby was silent. Everyone was staring at me. Tyrell stood up and walked over to me. He touched my arm as if to make sure I was real. "Dad," he said. "Who are you?" "Really?" I put my arm around him. "I am just your dad's son," I said. "Come on, let's go get some breakfast. I am starving, and I think we have a lot to talk about." We walked out of the bank into the bright morning sun. The silver Porsche was being towed away by a truck that had pulled up while we were inside. I guess Richard had missed a payment on that too. I walked toward my rusted Chevy Silverado. It looked beautiful in the sunlight. It was just a truck. But the man driving it was the new owner of the Stanford Empire, and the war was far from over. We returned to Tyrell's house in a convoy of tension. Tyrell drove his sedan, his hands gripping the wheel as if he were steering through a hurricane, while I sat in the passenger seat, calm and collected. Behind us, the Stanfords had been forced to take a taxi since their Porsche had been impounded outside the bank. Richard had demanded to come to the house. He claimed we needed to talk. He claimed there was a misunderstanding, but I knew the truth. He wanted to find a way to spin this. He wanted to regain control of the narrative before the reality of his bankruptcy set in. When we walked into the living room, the air was thick enough to choke on. Kimberly was sitting on the sofa, her eyes red and swollen, clutching a throw pillow like a shield. She looked up when we entered, hoping for good news, but finding only the thunderous expression on her father's face. Richard stormed in, slamming the front door with a violence that shook the picture frames on the walls. He didn't look like the suave tycoon anymore. His tie was crooked, his hair was disheveled, and his face was a mottled map of rage and panic. Pamela trailed behind him, looking small and terrified, her eyes darting around the room as if she expected the furniture to be repossessed at any moment. "You are a criminal!" Richard shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "That is the only explanation. There is no way a mail carrier has $20 million in liquid assets. You are a drug dealer, Jem. That is what this is." He turned to Tyrell, his eyes wild. "Do you see what he has done, Tyrell? He has compromised us all. That money is dirty. It is blood money. He has been running narcotics through the postal system for decades. Why do you think he drives that old truck? To blend in. He is a kingpin. And now he has used illegal funds to buy legitimate debt. The FBI will be here in an hour. They will seize everything. You need to distance yourself from him right now." I walked to the kitchen island and poured myself a glass of water. I watched Richard unravel. It was fascinating in a morbid way. His mind could not process that a black man could be wealthy without being a criminal. His prejudice was his blind spot, and right now it was driving him insane. "Dad, stop," Kimberly whispered, her voice trembling. "Just stop. He paid the mortgage. We are safe." "You are not safe," Richard roared, spinning on his daughter. "You are in the middle of a RICO case waiting to happen. Do you think the bank just handed over my loans to him because he asked nicely? He intimidated them. He probably threatened Henderson's family. This man is dangerous, Kimberly. He tried to poison you with that soul food, and now he is buying your debt to enslave you." I leaned against the counter, taking a slow sip of water. "You are projecting, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria like a razor. "You think everyone operates like you do. You think wealth only comes from exploitation and crime because that is the only way you know how to make money." "Don't you dare lecture me," Richard spat. "I built an empire. You carried letters. You are a fraud. And I am going to prove it. I am going to call the district attorney. I have friends in high places, Jem. I am going to have you audited, investigated, and thrown in a cell so deep you will never see the sun again." Tyrell stepped between us. His posture was different now. He stood taller. The weight of the debt was gone, and with it the fear. "My father is not a criminal," Richard, Tyrell said, his voice firm. "And you are not calling anyone. You are going to leave my house. Not until I get the truth." Richard screamed. "I want to know where the money came from. Admit it, Jem. Admit you are a thug. Admit you planted those drugs in the bear to throw us off the scent of your own operation." I set the glass down on the coaster. The drugs in the bear. He just couldn't let it go. He was so convinced of his own brilliance that he couldn't see the trap closing around his neck. "You want the truth, Richard?" I asked, walking slowly into the living room. "You want to know who the real criminal is in this room?" "I am looking at him," Richard sneered. I picked up the remote control for the large flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace. I had synced my phone to Tyrell's network the moment we walked in. Technology is a wonderful thing when you know how to use it. I think we should watch a movie, I said. I pressed a button. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a movie, it was security footage. High definition, crisp and clear. The timestamp was from the day of the party. The camera angle was from inside the garage looking down at the workbench. It showed Richard Stanford in his expensive suit looking over his shoulder nervously. He was holding a large golden teddy bear. He pulled a brick of white powder from his jacket pocket. He shoved it into the bear. He pulled out a black box, a tracker, and shoved that in too. Then he took a needle and thread from a small sewing kit he had brought with him and hastily stitched the bear back up. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the heavy breathing of Richard Stanford. "What is this?" Kimberly whispered, standing up slowly. Her eyes were glued to the screen. "It is a deepfake," Richard shouted, his face turning the color of ash. He manipulated the video. "That is AI. I never did that. I didn't pause the video. I let it play. I switched the feed. The screen changed. Now it was the interior of my house, my kitchen. The timestamp was from the morning of the gaslighting incident. The camera showed Richard entering my back door, using the unauthorized key. It showed him walking to my medication bottles. It showed him dumping my pills down the sink. It showed him walking to the stove. His hand reached out. He turned the gas knob. He didn't light it. He just turned it. He stood there for a second listening to the hiss of the gas, ensuring it was leaking. Then he turned and walked out. I paused the video on the frame where Richard's hand was on the gas knob. I turned to look at him. "Attempted murder, Richard," I said softly. "That is what that is. You broke into my home. You tampered with my life-saving medication. And you turned on the gas hoping I would come home tired and confused and never wake up. You tried to kill me. And you tried to frame me for drug trafficking to steal my granddaughter." Kimberly made a sound that was half sob and half scream. She looked at her father with a horror so profound it seemed to physically age her. "Dad," she choked out. "Tell me that isn't real. Tell me you didn't try to kill Jem." "It is a lie," Richard babbled, backing away from the TV as if it were radioactive. "He doctored the footage. He is a hacker. He is trying to frame me. Pamela, tell them. Tell them I was with you." Pamela was sitting on the armchair, her face buried in her hands. She didn't look up. She didn't speak. She knew. She had always known what he was capable of. "You tried to kill him," Kimberly screamed. "You tried to kill my husband's father, and you tried to send Tyrell to prison. The drugs, the bear, you gave that to Zoe. You put cocaine in my daughter's birthday present." "It was necessary," Richard yelled, losing control completely. "We needed the money, Kimberly. We needed Zoe. The trust fund was the only way. Do you think I wanted to do it? I did it for us, for the family, to save the legacy. You did it for yourself," I corrected him. "You did it because you are a failure who spent money you didn't have and got in bed with mobsters. You were willing to sacrifice your daughter, your granddaughter, and my son to save your own skin." Kimberly looked at her mother. "Mom, did you know?" Pamela looked up. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks. "We were going to lose the house, Kimmy," she wailed. "We were going to be poor. You don't understand what it is like to lose everything." Kimberly recoiled as if her mother had slapped her. She looked at her parents, the people she had worshipped and feared her entire life, and she finally saw them. She saw the rot beneath the silk and the diamonds. She saw the monsters who had burned down her world just to keep themselves warm. "Get out," Kimberly whispered. "What?" Richard asked, blinking. "Get out!" Kimberly screamed, her voice breaking into a shriek of pure anguish. "Get out of my house! Get out of my life! I never want to see you again! You are not my parents! You are sick! You are evil!" "But Kimmy, sweetheart," Richard pleaded, stepping toward her. "We can fix this. I can explain." "Don't touch me!" she yelled, backing away until she hit Tyrell's chest. Tyrell wrapped his arms around her, holding her up as her legs gave out. He pointed at the door. "You heard her?" Tyrell said, his voice cold steel. "Leave, before I call the police and show them this video myself." Richard looked around the room. He looked at the TV where his crime was frozen in pixels. He looked at me, the mailman who now owned his life. He looked at his daughter who was looking at him with hatred. "You are making a mistake," Richard hissed, trying to salvage some scrap of dignity. "You need me. Without me, you are nothing. I walked over to the door and opened it. The only mistake was thinking you could win, I said. Goodbye, Richard. I will see you at the eviction hearing. Richard straightened his jacket. He tried to summon the arrogant tycoon one last time, but the illusion was shattered. He looked small. He looked old. He walked out the door, his head down. Pamela followed him, sobbing quietly into her hands. I closed the door and locked it. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the sound of Kimberly's weeping. Tyrell held her, rocking her back and forth. I stood by the TV and turned it off. The screen went black, erasing the image of Richard's crime, but the truth remained. The Stanford family was broken. The facade was gone. And for the first time, Kimberly was free. The silence in the living room was shattered not by a scream, but by the click of Pamela's heels as she refused to follow her husband out the door. Richard was defeated, a broken man walking to his execution. But Pamela was different. She was a survivor, a parasite who knew that if she lost her host, she would die. She turned back to Kimberly, her face shifting instantly from terror to a mask of maternal concern that made my stomach turn. She rushed toward her daughter, ignoring Tyrell, ignoring me, ignoring the evidence of attempted murder still frozen on the television screen. She grabbed Kimberly's hands, her grip tight and desperate, her manicured nails digging into my daughter-in-law's skin. Kimberly, baby, look at me, Pamela pleaded, her voice trembling with a practiced vibrato. You cannot let him leave like that. He is your father. He built this life for you. He made a mistake, yes, but he did it out of love. He did it because he was terrified you were going to end up destitute living in a shack like this man. She gestured at me with a flick of her head, her eyes filled with venom. You have a choice to make right now, Kimberly. It is the most important choice of your life. You can choose your blood, your history, the people who raised you in silk and safety. Or you can choose them. She pointed at Tyrell and me. You can choose this failure of a husband who couldn't even keep his business afloat without your father's charity. You can choose this criminal father of his who clearly has been lying to everyone for decades. Do you really think a mailman gets millions legally? He is going to drag you down, Kimberly. He is going to drag you into a world of police raids and violence. Look at what happened tonight. Do you want Zoe growing up in a house that gets raided at 2 a.m? Pamela squeezed Kimberly's hands harder, shaking her slightly. Come with us, Kimberly. Pack a bag. Bring Zoe. We will go to the Hamptons. We will figure this out. We will hire the best lawyers. We will fix this mess. But you have to choose now. It is us or them. If you stay here, if you side with these people, you are dead to us. We will write you out of the will. You will never see a dime of the Stanford money. You will be alone, rotting in this middle-class nightmare. Choose Kimberly. Choose your mother. I watched Kimberly. I saw the tremor in her shoulders. I saw the years of conditioning weighing down on her. Pamela wasn't just her mother, she was her programmer. She had installed the buttons she was now frantically pushing. Fear, guilt, obligation, the terrifying prospect of poverty. For a second, I thought she might break. I thought the gravity of her upbringing would be too strong to escape. Tyrell stepped forward, ready to defend her, but I held out a hand to stop him. This wasn't his fight. This was an exorcism, and Kimberly had to perform it herself. Kimberly looked at her mother. She looked at the woman who had criticized her weight since she was 12. The woman who had told her on her wedding day that she could have done better. The woman who had treated her panic attacks as inconveniences to her social calendar. Then she looked at me, and I saw the memories flash behind her eyes. I saw her remembering the day Zoe was born. Richard and Pamela had been in Italy on vacation. They sent a fruit basket. I was in the waiting room for 18 hours. I held Kimberly's hand when Tyrell passed out from exhaustion. I brought her ice chips. I told her she was a warrior. She remembered the nights Tyrell worked late trying to save his firm. Pamela would call and ask why her husband was neglecting her, why he wasn't taking her to galas. I would come over, quietly entering through the back door. I would have a Tupperware container of stew. I would feed Zoe. I would help with homework. I would do the dishes and leave before anyone felt obligated to entertain me. She remembered the way Richard looked at Zoe like she was a prop for a photo op, a doll to be dressed up and shown off. And she compared it to the way I looked at Zoe like she was the only star in the sky. She remembered the teddy bear, the cold, hard lump in its stomach, the drugs. She looked back at Pamela. The fog cleared. The programming shorted out. She didn't see a mother. She saw a stranger in expensive clothes who had tried to frame her husband and murder her father-in-law just to balance a checkbook. Kimberly pulled her hands away. It was a violent motion, a physical tearing of the bond. "You talk about safety," Kimberly said, her voice starting as a whisper but rising with every word. "You talk about protecting me. You tried to send my husband to prison. Mom. You put cocaine in my daughter's birthday present." "That was," Richard Pamela hissed, desperate. "I didn't know the details, I just wanted to help." "You knew," Kimberly screamed. "You always know. You are his partner. You are his shadow. You stood there and watched him destroy Tyrell's career. You watched him gaslight an old man. You watched him try to kill Jem. And you did nothing. You helped him because you were afraid of losing your house. You were afraid of being poor." She took a step toward her mother, forcing Pamela to retreat toward the door. "You ask me to choose." Kimberly continued, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes burning with a fire I had never seen. "You want me to choose between the people who tried to destroy my family and the people who saved it. You want me to choose between money and love." She pointed at me. "This man," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "this man you call a failure lived on a pension for years so he wouldn't be a burden to us. He drove a rusted truck. He wore old clothes. And the moment we were in trouble, the moment you tried to crush us, he didn't run. He didn't ask for anything. He paid the debt. He saved our home. He saved Tyrell. He is more of a father to me in one day than Richard has been in 30 years. Pamela looked shocked. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "But Kimberly, he is one of them. He is not our kind. Our kind." Kimberly laughed a bitter, broken sound. "What is our kind, mother? Criminals, liars, murderers. If that is our kind, I don't want to be it. I would rather live in a shack with Jem than in a palace with you. I would rather be poor and decent than rich and rotten." Kimberly took a deep breath. She stood tall. She looked like a queen reclaiming her throne. "I choose them," she said. "I choose my husband. I choose my daughter. And I choose Jem, because they are my family. You are just the people who share my DNA. And frankly, I am ashamed of it." Pamela's face twisted into an ugly snarl. "You ungrateful little brat. Full? After everything we gave you, we will destroy you. We will sue you. You will come crawling back when you are starving. Get out," Kimberly said. It wasn't a scream this time. It was a command. "Get out of my house. Get out of my driveway. Get out of my life. If I see you near Zoe again, if I see you near Tyrell, if I see you near Jem, I will call the police and I will press charges myself. I will testify against you. I will tell the world what you did." Pamela stared at her daughter for one last second, searching for a weakness, searching for the little girl she used to control. She found nothing. She found a wall of iron. She turned and fled. She ran out the door, stumbling in her heels, chasing after the husband who had already abandoned her to save himself. Kimberly slammed the door. She locked the deadbolt. She engaged the security chain. Then she turned around and slid down the door until she hit the floor. She buried her face in her knees and sobbed. It wasn't the sobbing of a victim. It was the sobbing of someone releasing a lifetime of poison. It was the sound of chains breaking. Tyrell ran to her. He sat on the floor and wrapped his arms around her. He rocked her back and forth, kissing her hair. I stood back, giving them space. My heart was full. This was the victory, not the money, not the foreclosure. This. The moment Kimberly realized she was free, she looked up at me through her tears. Her makeup was ruined. Her face was blotchy, but she looked beautiful. "Jem," she whispered, "I am so sorry. I am so sorry I let them treat you like that. I am so sorry I didn't see it sooner." I walked over and knelt beside them. I took her hand. It was cold, but her grip was strong. "You saw it when it mattered, Kimberly," I said softly. "You protected this house. You protected your family. That is all that matters." She squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for saving us." "I didn't save you," I said, smiling. "I just bought the mortgage. You saved yourself." We sat there on the floor of the hallway for a long time. The house was quiet. The toxic presence of the Stanfords was gone, expelled by the sheer force of Kimberly's will. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light through the windows. It was a new day, a new chapter. But I knew it wasn't over. Richard and Pamela were gone, but they weren't finished. People like them don't just disappear. They regroup, they find lawyers, they find loopholes. And I still had one more card to play. The final nail in the coffin. I stood up, my knees cracking. Rest, I told them. Take the night. Be together. Hold Zoe tight. Where are you going? Tyrell asked, wiping his eyes. I have an appointment, I said, checking my watch. Alana is waiting for me. We have some paperwork to file with the FBI. Kimberly looked at me, her eyes wide. The FBI? I nodded. Richard didn't just try to kill me, Kimberly, I said. He defrauded a trust fund. He laundered money. And he crossed state lines to do it. This isn't a family dispute anymore. It is a federal case, and I am the star witness. I walked to the door. I paused and looked back at them. They looked battered, but they looked together. Lock the door behind me, I said, and don't open it for anyone but me. I walked out into the cool evening air. My truck was waiting. I climbed in and started the engine. It roared to life, a comforting, familiar sound. I pulled out of the driveway, leaving the Stanfords' defeat in my rearview mirror. I had one stop left. I needed to see Alana, and then I needed to see a man about a pair of handcuffs. Richard Stanford wanted a legacy. I was going to give him one, a federal inmate number. I drove to the federal building downtown where Alana was waiting in the lobby with a team of agents who looked like they were carved out of granite. We spent an hour finalizing the affidavits and handing over the physical evidence, including the teddy bear, the recordings, and the forensic accounting report Alana had compiled. The lead agent, a man named Special Agent Miller, looked at the file and then at me with a mixture of respect and disbelief. He told me they had been trying to build a case against the Albanian money laundering ring for 2 years, but they lacked the inside man. Richard Stanford was that man. The warrant was issued immediately. We knew exactly where Richard would be. He wasn't the type to run. He was the type to double down. He would be trying to bully his way back into control. I drove back to Tyrell's house with Alana following in her car and 2 unmarked vans trailing behind us. When I pulled up to the curb, I saw that I was right. Richard had returned. He was standing on the front lawn screaming at the closed front door. Beside him stood a man in a 3-piece suit holding a briefcase, a lawyer who looked expensive and predatory. Pamela was there too, pacing nervously by the curb, her face a mask of ruined mascara and terror. I stepped out of my truck. Richard saw me and pointed a shaking finger. "There he is!" Richard shouted to his lawyer. "That is the man. That is the thief who hacked the bank. Serve him. I want him arrested. I want my property back." The lawyer adjusted his tie and stepped forward, blocking my path to the house. He looked at my flannel shirt and my work boots and sneered. "Mr. Cross," he said, his voice oily and condescending. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I represent Mr. Richard Stanford. We are filing an immediate injunction against your fraudulent acquisition of the Stanford debt portfolio. We are also filing criminal charges for identity theft, wire fraud, and elder abuse. You have manipulated the banking system illegally. We demand that you vacate these premises and surrender all documents related to the Stanford estate immediately, or you will be facing 20 years in prison." Richard stepped up behind his lawyer, looking emboldened. He thought the law was a weapon he owned. He thought a suit and a briefcase could erase the truth. "You hear that, Jem?" Richard spat, his eyes wild with desperation. "It is over. You thought you could steal my empire with a fake credit card. You are nothing but a con artist. I am going to take everything you have. I am going to take your truck, your house, and your pension, and then I am going to take Zoe to Switzerland just like I planned. You can't stop me. I am Richard Stanford. I own this town." He was delusional. He was drowning and he thought he was swimming. He turned toward the house and screamed at the door. "Kimberly, open this door right now. If you don't, I will have Tyrell arrested as an accomplice to this fraud. I will ruin him. I will make sure he never works again. Open the door." The front door remained shut. Tyrell and Kimberly were holding the line just as I had asked. I looked at the lawyer. "Mr. Sterling," I asked calmly, "did your client inform you that he is currently in default on $17 million of commercial debt? Did he inform you that he attempted to murder me 3 days ago by tampering with a gas line? Did he inform you that he planted cocaine in a child's teddy bear?" The lawyer paused. He looked at Richard. Richard hadn't told him everything. Clients like Richard never do. "That is slander," the lawyer said, but his voice lacked conviction. "My client is a respected businessman. These are wild accusations from a senile man. We will see you in court, Mr. Cross." I smiled. It was a cold smile. "We certainly will," I said. "But not civil court." I nodded to Alana, who was standing by her car. She raised her hand. The side doors of the unmarked van slid open. 12 FBI agents in tactical vests poured out. They moved with the precision of a hammer striking a nail. They didn't run, they didn't shout, they just advanced. Richard looked around confused. He thought they were his private security. He thought he had summoned them. "See?" Richard yelled triumphantly. "The authorities are here. Arrest him. Arrest the mailman." Special Agent Miller stepped forward. He walked past me. He walked past the lawyer, who had suddenly turned very pale and stepped aside. He walked straight up to Richard Stanford. "Richard Stanford, Agent Miller," said, his voice booming in the quiet suburban street. "Yes," Richard said, straightening his jacket. "About time you got here. This man has stolen my assets. I want to press charges." Richard Stanford, Agent Miller continued, ignoring Richard's outburst. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, defrauding a charitable trust, and interstate transport of stolen goods." Richard blinked. He looked at the agent. He looked at the handcuffs hanging from the agent's belt. He laughed. A short, sharp bark of disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded. "You have the wrong person. I am the victim here. He is the criminal. Look at him. He is a mailman." Agent Miller spun Richard around and slammed him against the hood of the lawyer's car. He pulled Richard's arms behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was loud and final. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller recited. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Pamela screamed. It was a high, piercing sound. She tried to run toward Richard, but 2 female agents intercepted her. "Pamela Stanford, you are also under arrest for conspiracy and accessory to fraud," Miller added. "No," Pamela shrieked, struggling as they cuffed her. "I didn't do anything. It was him. He made me do it. I just wanted to save the house." Richard was thrashing against the car hood. "This is a mistake," he bellowed. "Do you know who I am? Know who I will have your badge. I will sue the FBI. Sterling, do something." The lawyer, Arthur Sterling, was already backing away, his hands raised. "I am not a criminal defense attorney," he stammered. "I represent him in civil matters only. I am leaving." He got in his car and drove away, leaving his client to face the federal government alone. Richard looked around wildly. His eyes landed on me. I was standing next to Alana, watching the empire crumble. Jem Richards screamed, his face pressed against the metal of the car. Tell them this is a mistake. You did this. You planted this. You are framing me." I walked over to him. The agents let me pass. I stood inches from his face. He smelled of sweat and fear. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified realization that his money, his connections, and his name meant absolutely nothing anymore. "I didn't frame you, Richard," I said softly. "I just turned on the lights." "Who are you?" Richard whispered, tears streaming down his face, mixed with snot. "A mailman doesn't have the FBI on speed dial. A mailman doesn't have $20 million. Who are you?" I leaned in close. I wanted him to hear this. I wanted this to be the sound that haunted him in his cell for the next 20 years. I signaled for the agents to pull him up so he could look me in the eye. "You spent years laughing at me, Richard," I said. "You laughed at my truck. You laughed at my clothes. You laughed at my people. You thought because I delivered letters I was nobody." I took a breath, savoring the moment. "I am not a mailman, Richard. I am the man the mailman works for. I spent 40 years hunting men like you, men who think they are smarter than the system, men who think they can steal from widows and orphans and hide it in shell companies." I pulled my old postal ID from my wallet. I flipped it over. On the back, underneath a piece of tape I peeled away, was a different badge. A badge that hadn't seen the light of day in a decade. It was a gold shield. "Department of the Treasury, Special Investigations. I am the ghost auditor," I whispered. Richard's eyes rolled back in his head. His knees buckled. He knew the name. Everyone in the world of high finance and black market money knew the name. The ghost auditor was a legend, a boogeyman who had dismantled cartels and corrupt banks in the 90s before vanishing. He realized in that split second that he hadn't been fighting a senile grandfather. He had been fighting a legend. He slumped against the agent, a dead weight. His spirit broke. He didn't scream anymore. He didn't fight. He just stared at the ground, broken and empty. "Get him out of here," Agent Miller ordered. They dragged Richard and Pamela toward the vans. Tyrell and Kimberly came out of the house holding Zoe. They stood on the porch watching the flashing lights. Zoe looked at me. She smiled. She didn't look scared. She looked safe. Alana walked up to me. She handed me a file. "The foreclosure is complete," she said. "You own the hotels. You own the house. You own everything." I looked at the file. I looked at my son and his family safe on their porch. "Burn it," I said. Alana looked at me shocked. "The hotels, the assets, that is $50 million in real estate." "I don't want his hotels," I said. "I don't want his dirty money. Liquidate it. Sell it all. Pay off the innocent suppliers he stiffed. Pay the employees he cheated. Donate the rest to the Inner City Scholarship Fund. Just keep enough to set up a real trust for Zoe, one that no one can ever touch." Alana smiled. "You are a crazy old man, Jem. I am just a retired mailman," I said, winking. I walked up the driveway to my son. Tyrell looked at me with awe. "Dad," he said, "the ghost auditor." "Seriously?" I shrugged. "It paid the bills, son, and it came in handy today." Kimberly hugged me. She held on tight, sobbing into my flannel shirt. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us." I hugged her back. "We are family," I said. "That is what we do." The police vans drove away, taking the toxicity out of our lives. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was over. The lies were over. The fear was over. I looked at my rusted truck. It needed an oil change, and maybe a new transmission, but it had gotten me here. I picked up Zoe. She buried her face in my neck. "Grandpa," she asked, "can we have cake now?" I laughed. "Yes, baby girl. We can have all the cake you want." And as we walked back into the house, I knew that for the first time in a long time, everything was going to be all right. The ghost auditor could finally rest. Grandpa Jem was ready for duty. The red and blue lights of the police convoy faded into the distance, leaving a silence so heavy it felt like it had physical weight. The neighborhood, which had been a theater of chaos just moments before, returned to the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. But the world inside my son's home had irrevocably changed. Richard and Pamela Stanford were gone not just from the driveway but from our lives entirely. Their departure was not merely an arrest, it was an erasure. Within hours, the local news would break the story. The Stanford Hotel Group was being seized by federal authorities. The assets were frozen. The mansion on the hill where they had looked down on the rest of us was now a crime scene wrapped in yellow tape. The empire built on debt and deceit had collapsed into dust, leaving nothing behind but shame and handcuffs. Tyrell stood on the porch, staring at the empty spot where the police van had been. He looked like a man who had survived a plane crash only to realize he was stranded on an unknown island. Kimberly was beside him, holding Zoe so tight I thought the poor girl might pop. They were safe. They were free. But they were also terrified. The foundation of their reality had cracked. They had spent years believing they were the poor relations, the failures who needed the Stanford charity to survive. Now they knew the truth. They were the only honest people in a game rigged by criminals, and the man they thought was a broke retired mailman had just flipped the board. We went inside. The house felt different now. It didn't feel like a prison owned by Richard anymore. It felt like a home again, but a home filled with questions. We sat in the living room, the same room where I had played the footage of Richard's crimes. Tyrell couldn't sit still. He paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair. He looked at me, then looked away, then looked back again. He was trying to reconcile the father who drove a rusted truck and clipped coupons with the man who had just commanded the FBI and bought a $17 million debt portfolio with a titanium card. "Dad," Tyrell finally said, his voice shaking, "I don't understand. I really don't understand. The truck, the house, the clothes. You worked at the post office for 20 years. I saw you in the uniform. I saw the pay stubs. Was it all a lie? Were you ever really a mailman?" I sat in the armchair, leaning forward, my elbows on my knees. I looked at my son, my beautiful, talented, honest son. I owed him this. I owed him the whole truth. "I was a mailman, Tyrell," I said softly. "For the last 10 years, I really delivered the mail. I woke up at 4 a.m., I sorted letters, I walked the route, I cashed the checks. That wasn't a lie, it was a choice. But the money Tyrell asked, the millions, the ghost auditor, where did that come from? It came from the life I lived before you knew who I really was," I explained. "Before I retired, I spent 30 years finding money that people didn't want found. I worked for the government, I worked for private corporations, I worked for people who needed problems to disappear. I was paid very well to be invisible. I invested that money quietly. I bought land when it was cheap. I bought stocks when everyone else was selling. I let the interest compound while I lived below my means. Kimberly spoke up, her voice timid. But why hide it, Jem? Why live in that drafty house? Why drive that truck? We thought you were struggling. We worried about you. We felt guilty every time we bought something nice because we knew you didn't have much. I looked at Kimberly. I saw the guilt in her eyes and it pained me. I didn't do it to hurt you, I said. I did it to protect you. Protect us from what Tyrell asked. From money. Yes, I said firmly. From money. And from the people money attracts. Look at Richard. Look at what money did to him. Look at what the pursuit of status turned him into. He became a monster who would sell his own granddaughter to keep up appearances. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the dark street. When you were born, Tyrell, I had already made my first million. I could have bought a mansion. I could have sent you to private schools with kids like Richard Stanford. I could have given you a sports car when you turned 16. But I saw what happened to the children of my clients. I saw them grow up entitled, soft, and useless. They didn't know the value of work. They didn't know how to build anything because they were too busy spending what their fathers had earned. I turned back to him. I wanted you to be different. I wanted you to be a man who stood on his own 2 feet. I wanted you to become an architect because you loved building, not because you needed a tax shelter. I wanted you to find a wife who loved you for your heart, not your inheritance. And you did. You built a life, Tyrell. You struggled, yes. You fell down. But you got back up. You are strong. If I had paved the road for you, you would never have learned how to walk over the rough patches. Tyrell sank onto the sofa. He put his head in his hands. But you let us suffer, Dad, he whispered. These last 2 years. The debt, the fear, the humiliation. You watched Richard treat me like dirt. You watched us almost lose everything. You could have stopped it with a check. Why did you wait so long? This was the hardest part, the part that kept me up at night. Because you had to see it. I said, my voice thick with emotion. You had to see Richard for who he really was. If I had bailed you out the first time you asked, Richard would still be in your life. He would still be whispering in your ear, making you feel small, controlling you. You would have taken my money and given it to him to pay off debts he created. You would have stayed in his trap. I walked over and sat next to him. I couldn't just save your finances, Tyrell. I had to save your soul. I had to wait until you were ready to walk away from him. Tonight, when Kimberly told them to get out when you stood up to him, that was the moment. That was when you became free. My money couldn't buy that freedom. Only your courage could. Tyrell looked at me. There were tears in his eyes, but there was understanding too. He realized that the check I wrote at the bank wasn't a gift. It was a reinforcement. It was the cavalry arriving only after the soldiers had held the line. So what happens now? Kimberly asked. Richard's assets are seized. We don't have his support anymore, not that we want it, but the firm, the contracts. I reached into my back pocket. I didn't have the titanium card this time. I had a folded piece of paper. It was a deed. The Stanford assets are toxic, I said. I ordered Alana to liquidate them. We are selling the hotels, the mansion, the cars, everything. The proceeds will go to pay off the innocent people Richard cheated. The suppliers, the contractors, the staff. Whatever is left, if anything, will go into a blind trust for Zoe. We are washing our hands of his dirty money. I handed the paper to Tyrell. But this is clean. Tyrell unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the legal description. His mouth fell open. Dad, this is the city center building, the one downtown. It is, I said. I bought it this afternoon through a holding company while Alana was dealing with the FBI. It is a good building, solid bones. It has 4 floors of office space. Tyrell looked up at me bewildered. Why did you buy an office building? Because your landlord called me, I said. Richard didn't just call the loan on your house. He canceled your office lease. You were going to be evicted on Monday. I pointed at the deed. You are the new owner, Tyrell. Not the tenant. The owner. The top floor is for your firm. You have the best view in the city now. No rent, no Richard breathing down your neck. The other 3 floors have paying tenants. The income from those leases will cover the building's maintenance and give you enough operating capital to rebuild your business the right way. Tyrell's hands shook as he held the paper. You are giving me a building. No, I said sternly. I am not giving you anything. I am investing in you. I am the silent partner. The building is in your name, but if you run it into the ground, if you get lazy, if you start acting like Richard Stanford, I will take it back. Do you understand me?" Tyrell nodded. He understood. This wasn't a handout. It was a tool. "Money is a tool, son," I said, leaning back. "It is a hammer. You can use it to build a house, or you can use it to break someone's skull. Richard used it to break people. You are going to use it to build. You are an architect. Go build something beautiful. And hire back the staff you had to lay off. They have families too." Kimberly was crying again, but this time they were happy tears. She leaned over and kissed my cheek. "Thank you, Jem. Thank you for everything." I patted her hand. "You are safe now, Kimberly. No one is going to take Zoe. No one is going to hurt you." And Dad Tyrell asked, a small smile forming on his face. "What about you? Are you going to move into the penthouse? Are you going to buy a new truck?" I laughed. It was a deep, hearty sound that felt good in my chest. "Me? No. I like my house. It keeps me humble. And the truck runs fine, mostly. Besides, I have work to do." "Work?" Tyrell asked. "You are retired. You are the ghost auditor." "The ghost auditor never really retires," I said, winking at him. "There are always monsters, Tyrell, and someone has to hunt them. Besides, Alana tells me there is a developer in Chicago who is trying to evict a nursing home to build a casino. I think I might need to take a little trip." Tyrell looked at me with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "You are not going to stop, are you?" "Why should I?" I asked, standing up. "I have a lot of money, son. It would be a shame to let it sit in a bank when I could use it to ruin the day of some very bad people." I walked toward the door. I was tired. It had been a long day, but it was a good day. I had my family back. My son was standing tall, my granddaughter was safe, and the bad guys were in handcuffs. I opened the door and looked back at them. "I will see you on Sunday for dinner," I said, and Tyrell. "Yeah, Dad. You are cooking. No more oxtails for a while. I think I'm in the mood for something expensive, maybe a steak. You can afford it now." Tyrell laughed. "You got it, Dad. The best steak in town." I walked out into the night. The stars were shining brighter than usual. I climbed into my Silverado and turned the key. The engine sputtered and then roared to life. I patted the dashboard. "Come on, old girl," I whispered. "One more ride. We have a nursing home to save." I pulled away, leaving the beautiful house behind. I drove back to my drafty wooden shack. I stripped off the flannel shirt and put on a fresh pot of coffee. I opened my laptop. I had an email from Alana, subject Chicago project. I smiled. The mailman was off duty. The ghost was back on the clock. 1 year. 365 days since the flashing lights of the FBI vans painted my son's driveway red and blue. A lot can change in a year. The grass in Tyrell's backyard was green and lush, no longer trampled by the heavy feet of catering staff hired to impress people who did not care about us. The air smelled of charcoal smoke and barbecue sauce, not expensive perfume and desperation. It was Zoe's 10th birthday. I sat in a folding lawn chair holding a paper plate loaded with potato salad and ribs. Tyrell was manning the grill. He looked different. The lines of stress that had etched themselves into his forehead were gone, replaced by laugh lines around his eyes. His architecture firm was thriving. The city center building was fully leased and his team was winning contracts based on merit, not bribes. He wasn't driving a luxury sedan anymore. He bought a practical SUV that could haul blueprints and lumber. He was the man I always knew he could be. Kimberly sat on a picnic blanket helping Zoe organize her gifts. She looked younger too, lighter. She had started therapy shortly after her parents were indicted. It was a long road. Unlearning a lifetime of manipulation takes work, but she was doing it. She had cut all contact with Richard and Pamela, who were currently awaiting trial in federal detention without bail. She didn't talk about them. Today she was just a mother celebrating her daughter. Grandpa Zoe called out, running over to me. Her hair was in braids, bouncing as she moved. "Did you bring me a bear this year?" She was joking. It was a dark joke, but it was ours. It meant she was healing. It meant the trauma hadn't broken her spirit. "No bears, baby girl," I said, setting my plate down. "No bears ever again. I brought you something boring." "But boring is good. Boring means safe." I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a small blue booklet. It was a passbook savings account. I handed it to her. "What is it?" she asked, flipping through the pages. There were rows of numbers. "That is freedom, Zoe," I told her. "That is a college fund. It is a trust I set up for you. but unlike the one your other grandfather tried to steal, this one is yours. No one can touch it but you. Not me, not your dad, not even a lawyer. When you are 18, you can use it to go to school, to travel, to start a business. It is your safety net." Zoe looked at the balance. Her eyes went wide. "Grandpa, this is a lot of zeros." "It is enough," I said, winking. "Enough so you never have to do anything you don't want to do. Enough so you never have to be afraid." She hugged me. It was a fierce hug. A hug that said she knew exactly what I had done to protect her, even if she didn't know all the bloody details. "Thank you, Grandpa," she whispered. "Go play," I said, patting her back. "Enjoy being 10. It goes by fast." She ran off to join her friends who were splashing in the pool. I watched her go. This was what victory looked like. It wasn't about the money I had in the bank or the enemies I had destroyed. It was this: a backyard barbecue, a laughing child, a family that was whole. Tyrell walked over and handed me a cold beer. "She looks happy," he said, looking at his daughter. "She is happy," I replied. "We all are. You know, Dad?" Tyrell said, sitting in the chair next to me. I was thinking, the firm is doing great. We have a surplus this quarter. I was thinking of buying that old lot next to your house, maybe building a guest cottage, so you don't have to drive home late. I smiled. He wanted me closer. He wasn't ashamed of me anymore. He wanted his father around. "That sounds like a good investment, son," I said. "But don't worry about me. The drive keeps me sharp." We sat in silence, sipping our beers, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned purple. Fireflies started to blink in the bushes. It was perfect. It was peaceful. And then my phone buzzed against my thigh. It wasn't a text message notification. It was a specific vibration pattern. 3 short pulses, 1 long. It was the emergency line, the line only one person used. I pulled the phone from my pocket. The screen was dim, but the message was clear. It was from Alana Hart. "Boss, we have a situation. A private equity firm from New York just bought the debt of the construction company repairing the bridge near Tyrell's office. They are looking into eminent domain laws. They want to condemn the block to build a high-rise. The CEO is a man named Marcus Vane. He used to work with Richard Stanford in the 90s. He knows who owns the city center building. He is coming for it." I stared at the screen. Marcus Vane. I knew the name. He was a shark. A bottom feeder who specialized in hostile takeovers and aggressive litigation. He wasn't coming for the building because it was a good investment. He was coming for it because he knew I had taken Richard down. He was coming for revenge. Or maybe he just smelled blood in the water and thought he could take a bite out of the old mailman. He thought he could use the law to steal what I had given my son. He thought he could bulldoze my family's future to build a glass tower. I looked at Tyrell. He was laughing at something Kimberly said. He looked so relaxed, so safe. He thought the war was over. He thought the monsters were all in jail. He was wrong. There are always more monsters. I put the phone back in my pocket. I took a sip of beer. The cold liquid felt good going down. I felt that familiar itch in my fingers. The itch to open a spreadsheet. The itch to dig into a shell company. The itch to hunt. To... "Everything okay, Dad?" Tyrell asked, noticing my silence. "Everything is fine, son," I said. "Just checking the weather. Looks like a storm might be brewing up north." Tyrell looked at the clear sky. "Really? It looks clear to me." I smiled. It was the smile of the ghost auditor. "It is clear here," I said. "But you never know when the wind might change." I stood up. My knees didn't creak this time. I felt energized. I felt ready. "I'm going to head out," I said. "I have an early morning." "But the cake," Tyrell protested. "Save me a slice," I said. "I have some reading to do." I walked to my truck. I climbed in and started the engine. I looked back at the house one last time. They were safe for tonight. And they would be safe tomorrow, because I was going to handle Marcus Vane. I was going to find his skeletons. I was going to find his hidden accounts. And I was going to make him wish he had never looked at a map of this city. I pulled my phone out again and texted Alana back, "Get the file on Vane, Sayetage, and tell the boys in Chicago to stand down. I have work to do here." I put the truck in gear and pulled away. The peaceful retirement of Jeremiah Cross was over. "Retirement is hard," I whispered to the empty cab. especially when you are the only thing standing between the wolves and the sheep. I drove into the night. The ghost was awake, and he was hungry. In a world obsessed with appearances, we often forget that true power moves in silence. Richard Stanford believed his wealth made him untouchable, but he learned a brutal truth: dignity cannot be bought, and a father's love cannot be intimidated. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting about their success. It's the one who quietly holds the keys to the kingdom. We must remember that family isn't defined by blood or bank accounts, but by unshakable loyalty. Never mistake kindness for weakness, because the humblest among us often carry the heaviest swords when it comes to protecting those we love. If you enjoyed seeing the Ghost Auditor serve justice, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of redemption and revenge. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to humble someone who underestimated you? I'd love to hear your story.